If you listen closely, you can probably hear the thunder tuning up outside. It's a good thing we've got a cozy fire and a lot of great stories on today's episode of Cozy Horror with me, Dr. Plague. Let's find some great stories to get you through this wet, rainy day. Today's theme will be strange government organizations, and boy, do we have some stories for that. Coming to us first is one from yours truly, Dr. Plague, about a strange site that's spawned a whole series of stories, if you're a fan of the channel. So let's hear a little story about Black Site number 7.
I'm in the wind now. I'm sure I'll be dead by tomorrow, but I need to let people know this thing is loose. I'm an agent with the United States government, and my station is Black Site number 7. I won't tell you my name. It wouldn't matter much anyway. But this was not how I saw my life going. I spent 6 years in Iraq, signed up right after high school. It was nothing like the recruiter told me it would be. I spent 8 hours in the blistering heat. I hauled my fair share of comrades out of firefights, and I saw a lot of crap out there that would make an ordinary person go crazier than I might be. I've had a camel spider crawl on me while I sleep. I watched friends I've known since basic get decapitated through binoculars, burned houses full of insurgents and civilians to rubble, and a lot of other things I really don't like to talk about. When I was done, they gave me my papers, thanked me for my service, and sent me home. I know I have no right to complain. Many guys didn't make it back, but home was worse. I'd spent 6 years in an active combat zone, and now I was just, supposed to come home and go back to civilian life? I spent 3 months in the civilian world. 2 of those months were spent in crappy apartments because my parents couldn't handle the night terrors and the jumpy Marine that their son had become. Every car horn, every barking dog, every firework rattling in the street had me reaching for my gun or breaking into a cold sweat when I couldn't find it. Before TJ found me, I was honestly considering killing myself. Then one day, he was just at my door with that big shit-eating grin he'd always worn in the desert. "You look like hell, Hoss. Let me get you some pancakes. I got something I want to discuss with you." TJ was my platoon leader in the sandbox. They called him the comedian because he was always smiling, always cracking jokes. He was a functional sociopath. I guess most of us were. I always admired his ability to laugh in the face of the messed up stuff we did. TJ is not his real name, clearly, but since he's still in this crap and I've left it behind, I figure the best I can do is not remind them that he's why I'm here. So he took me to breakfast. In the back of a crowded Denny's, he laid it all out for me. "You got it bad, Hoss, but that's okay, 'cause old Uncle TJ has the cure for you. Got a new job, familiar work that might interest you. Ever hear of Two Trees?" As it happened, I had. Two Trees was a government institute that, on the surface, did a lot of medical research and clinical trials. Underneath, though, they did wet work, and anyone who was involved in covert ops knew about Two Trees. We'd worked with them a few times in Iraq, and their guys were spooky, to say the least. "You're looking at the new head of Black Site number 7. I furrowed my brow at him. "Congrats. Should I know what that is?" "Of course not. It's a closely guarded government secret. Two Trees is paying me a small fortune to keep it that way. Problem is, I need someone to curate the site for me. Someone with military training, experience with firearms, and a need for some normalcy. Know anyone that might fit that bill, Hoss?" I knew what he was asking, but I didn't think I was the one he was looking for. I hadn't found work in 3 months since I'd been back, and most of that was because I couldn't settle into anything. I was constantly jumpy, constantly on edge, and that makes it hard to find work. No one wanted you doing security work or minding a gas station when every backfiring car was an enemy combatant. What would happen if I had an episode in a government facility of all places? I shook my head. "Thanks, but no thanks. I don't think I'm fit for duty the way I am." "Yeah, I thought you might say that." He pulled a metal tin out of his front pocket and slid it across the table. "Your medical file reads like a bench work for PTSD. Night terrors, irritability, being on edge, those irrational bouts of anger that got you thrown out of your parents' house." I felt defensive. "How did you know about that?" "You'd be surprised what my level of clearance will get you. The therapist records were about as hard to get as a beer at a gas station. Well, I got a little present for you, Hoss. Welcome to the rest of your life." he said, tapping the outside of the silver case. The case was about as big as an Altoids tin. There were no markings on it, no filigrees or needless ornaments, and it had the distinctly surgical look that you usually see with military tech. I slid my hand towards it, but I didn't seem to want to touch it. Every sense I had told me to walk away right now, not to touch that thing, and just walk away from this unassuming little case. I forced my hands to pop it open instead. Inside was a pair of gray gel caps. What are these? These are the answer to your prayers. 2 of these a day will make you feel as calm and clear as you did when you were a lad of 18. No more jumping at every noise. No more reaching for your gun when a dog barks or a car backfires. Just peace of mind. Looking back, that's probably what Mephistopheles said when he spoke to Faust. What's the catch? These pills are only available through the Two Trees Corporation. Employees who agree to be part of the clinical trials get them free of charge. But they're only available to employees, he said, with a little grin. Take them. Take a day to feel the effects, and let me know what you think. Call me tomorrow and give me your answer. Enjoy a night of freedom, then make your decision. I took the pills home with me, and after a few hours of staring at them, I took them with some vodka. The effects were sudden and immediate. If you've never had PTSD, then it's hard to explain, but it's like having a loose wire and someone suddenly fixes it. Then you go back to the way you used to be. My anxiety just melted away. My fear dissipated. My unease and dread were gone, and my anger seemed like a distant memory. I was sitting in my crappy apartment, surrounded by the trappings of my depression and my anxiety, and suddenly, I felt like I had before I boarded that bus in 2003 and headed out to basic training. I was finally comfortable in my own head. It was like coming back to a safe place after years of running from danger. After the first good night's sleep I'd had since shipping out, I called TJ and told him I was in. One question, I asked. What's in the pills that makes them work so well? He was silent for a long minute, and then finally he said, You really don't want to know, Hoss. Pack your stuff. There will be a moving truck to take you to West Virginia in the morning. And that is how I came to work at Black Site number 7. I must have looked like a junkie by the time I pulled up in front of my new house. I didn't have much. The truck had taken all 4 boxes into the deep woods as I followed in my old compact. The journey took me about 16 hours, and by the time I got there, I was starting to feel the anxiety creep back in. I became angry at how slow the truck was going, afraid that this whole thing was a trick and they would kill me. By the time I arrived, I found myself wanting to die, hoping for death, so I could return to the quiet that had been in my head before. That was when I saw TJ standing at the gate of what looked like an old military checkpoint. He flashed that knowing smile and handed me another silver case. I dry swallowed the pills without a word and felt the inner peace worming its way back into my brain. Then he showed me to my new quarters. It was a little bunk room with a bed, a kitchenette, and a locker for my clothes. There was a foot locker for my personal stuff, and I was told to keep the place clean. I would be responsible for the site and its security. TJ showed me a terminal off the bedroom for monitoring and camera feeds. The compound had cameras all over the place, but I appeared to be the only person here full-time. Site's mostly for storage these days, but it's what we get up to here at night that may interest you. That's why you're here. I need someone I can trust to watch this site 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. 4 times a year, you'll be relieved for a week of R&R somewhere. But other than that, this is your world, Hoss. That didn't bother me. I had no problem being alone after 3 months of people. What I was curious about was what I would be doing out here. What am I looking at exactly? TJ pointed at the 3 buildings on the camera. Truck comes twice a week. Let them through the gate and don't bother them. They'll take what they need from the building and won't bother you either. Keep nosy people out. Lethal force is authorized, and don't ever go in there, or I'll have to show you where Black Site 8 is, he said with a smile. The smile didn't make it to his eyes. Don't worry about being vigilant, though. If anything bigger than a mouse moves out there, the alarms will let you know about it right away. He told me that my food would be delivered once a week, mostly MREs, and I could order anything I wanted from the terminal in the living room. There was a workout yard near the second building, and I could move through the woods if I chose, as long as I took my phone with me so I could get alerts from the console. By the way, hand me your phone, he said. When I did, he put it in his pocket and handed me a new one. That's your new phone. I'll take the keys to your car, too, and put the money in your account. This is your life now, Hoss, so don't take this job lightly. If you leave the grounds, we'll know. If you try to update social media or try to tell anyone on the outside about what you've seen here, we'll know. If you want to get married or feel like you need out, arrangements can be made after your first 5-year tour. As far as anyone is concerned, you no longer exist. Don't be stupid. Put in your 5 years, and we'll reassess your position then. He grinned again and punched me in the arm. And lighten up. This'll be the easiest 5 years of your life. From that point on, I was an employee of Two Trees. TJ had been right. The first 5 years flew by. I lived on the site, spending my days working out or watching TV. I played the latest video games and watched the newest movies. Twice a week, as advertised, a truck rolled up and honked. I would check the cameras, open the gates, and they would do the rest. They would honk when they were ready to leave, and I left them alone. The trucks always had the Two Trees logo on them, and they never popped in to give me any crap, and I never went out to give them any. I never tried to get into the warehouses. I'd been a soldier long enough to know how to check my curiosity, and the scares were minimal. The food kept coming, the pills kept coming, and kept me in the right mind, too, and it was pretty peaceful, all told. The alarms, to my knowledge, only went off 3 times in that first year. 2 of those times, it was a deer who had wandered too close. The first time it happened, I had slunk out in a panic, service pistol in hand and boxer shorts flapping. As I rounded the first warehouse, I drew down on a very surprised doe who darted away before I could draw a bead on her. It was kind of a special moment for me. I had never seen a deer up close, and as it ran away, I was glad I hadn't shot it. The third time the alarm went off, it was a person, though. It was the first person I'd seen in 3 months. I'd been sitting at the console one night watching the latest Marvel Avengers movie. I think it might have been Infinity Wars. When the alarm went off, I paused the movie, expecting to see a deer or a rabbit on the monitor. My eyes went wide, though, when I realized it was a person. He had a crowbar. He was attempting to pry the door open. He must have come out of the woods because if he had driven up, I would have known about it sooner. It had been 3 months since I'd seen another person. The last one had been Agent Daughtry, who'd come to relieve me for a week of R&R in September. The idea of seeing a person not connected with Two Trees made me feel weird. Even when you were on R&R, you went to a company resort or a company place full of company people. This stopped you from getting a little too drunk and talking about all the stuff you did for your country. It was a great idea, but it meant you had nearly no interaction with civilians. I took my pistol out and crept up on him in near silence. When my foot came down on an extra crunchy stick, he turned his head and noticed me. He raised the crowbar as if to attack, and the rest was instinct. The gun went off without me having even spoken to him, reflexes taking over and dropping the threat before it could become a real danger. His left eye popped like an overripe fruit, and he fell down on the hard December ground. I called TJ, and he and some of the other men in suits came to assess the damage. You did just right, Hoss. He was a threat to the facility and needed to be put down. Don't think for a minute that this reflects poorly on you. What will you do with him? I asked. TJ smiled. Immediate disposal, Hoss. Think you got the stomach to help us? I found that I did, and once he was doused in gasoline, we set him ablaze at the edge of the property. They gave me a week of R&R for that, and when I came back, TJ must have decided that I was worthy of being brought in on certain things. The alarm went off about a week after I'd come back from R&R, and I saw a black car rolling up the front gate. TJ stepped out of it and waved as it stopped in the concrete roundabout, other men getting out as well. I slid my shoulder holster on and went out to meet him. It was 11 p.m., and a visit this late was highly irregular. As I approached the vehicle, 2 guys in suits were bringing a man with a bag on his head out of the car. He was wearing scrubs, his hands bound behind his back, and I could hear him crying beneath the black hood he wore. I looked between them, waiting for an explanation, and TJ threw an arm around me and walked me towards the spot where we had burnt the trespasser. Hoss, I think it's time that we bring you in on the second reason for black sites. You see, sometimes Two Trees has assets that need to be eliminated. The black sites are often used for this purpose. It's always the responsibility of the site's caretaker to carry out the elimination. Fringe benefits, I suppose you could say. Why wasn't I told this before? I asked, feeling indignant. I'm no murderer. Oh, well, those combatants in Iraq will be glad to hear that, won't they? He said almost snidely. That was war, TJ. This is murder. Think of this as war too, Hoss. These people are enemies, and they need to be eliminated for the good of the public safety. It's part of the job, Hoss, a part I know firsthand that you're capable of. They put the man on his knees in the middle of the burn spot, and I could hear him praying under that hood as we stood around him. Put him down, Hoss. That's an order, TJ said. "And if I won't?" I said, looking at him icily. The two men on either side drew their guns, and TJ grinned. "Then I'm afraid that these men will have to execute both of you. Come on, Hoss. Don't throw this away over some nobody. He's no different than the man outside the warehouse." Looking back, I kind of just wish I'd let them shoot me. But I guess if I had, you'd never know about any of this. Instead, I drew out my gun and put a bullet in his skull, glowering at TJ as his buddies put their guns away. "You made the right choice, Hoss. Who knows? You might not have to do this more than a dozen times in the next 4 years." On that note, he was wrong. I executed an asset a month after that. They were mostly people in scrubs, people in lab coats, doctors, researchers, people who had likely tried to steal from whatever facility they worked at. They were men, women, old men, and scared 20-somethings. I never bothered to learn their names. They were just assets that needed to be eliminated. I became kind of numb to the process. We burned them afterwards. Gasoline and fire made it like they were never there. The spot near the edge had a charred look to it for a while after that. At the end of 5 years, TJ came to see me and asked if I wanted to re-up. What happens if I walk away?" I asked. I was eating dinner when he came by, and he had sat down to have a plate of fettuccine with me. Given my free time, I had learned to do a good number of things that I couldn't before. I became a pretty good cook. I learned to play the guitar, read every book on the shelf I had bought to hold them, and there was a chainsaw out back along with some sculptures I had made with it. I couldn't say I hadn't enjoyed my time here, the killings aside, but I was curious to know if they'd actually let me leave. "You'll be allowed to return to the real world, your bank account fuller and your retirement substantial. Just watch what you say out there. I'd hate to have to bring you back for your replacement to put a bullet in." I ended up signing up for another 4 years. I shouldn't have done that. I was 8 years deep when they brought the girl in the black bag to me. It was 2 a.m., and I had started to think about going to bed when the alarm went off. I saw the town car rolling up and looked for TJ. He was not the one that climbed out, however. This guy had his hair slicked back, his suit a perfect blue pinstripe. He didn't wave at me, and I felt a sense of dread as I grabbed my gun. Somehow I expected TJ to be under that bag this time. The man's name was Stein, and luckily he did not have TJ under that bag. What he did have was a kid with a thick black bag over their head. I couldn't tell at first if it was a boy or a girl. They were dressed in baggy clothes, Salvation Army rags that a homeless guy would be embarrassed to wear, and they were crying loudly under their hood. 2 familiar men had the kid, and they both looked stoic about the whole matter. Stein didn't say anything, just led the procession over to the charred spot and put the kid on their knees. When he didn't take the hood off, I did it myself. He winced, but he didn't stop me. This was my place, my job, and I had garnered a reputation for being a professional, a reputation I was about to ruin. The bag came off, and the little girl's tear-streaked face came into view in the harsh fluorescence. Her hair was cut short, dirty blonde, and her face was covered in bruises. Her nose looked broken, her lips split. The blood trickled down her face like red tears, and they mingled with her actual tears as they fell to the damp earth. I sighed, looking at Stein as the gun stayed at the ready. "The hell is this?" Stein looked surprised. "It's an asset. TJ said you could handle these for us. Handle the asset." "This is a kid, barely old enough to wipe her own ass. What could she have possibly done?" Stein's face was stony. "Yours is not to question, soldier. Liquidate this asset, or be liquidated." I looked at the kid, her whole face shaking as the tears and blood fell, and I thought about watching her head pop like a grape. This wasn't some scared adult, some stoic old man, some praying woman, or some cursing thing in a sallow skin. This was a kid. I had killed a lot of people, more in my time here than I ever had during war, but I was still a professional. Professionals had standards. "No," I said. Stein blinked. "What?" "No, I don't kill kids. Do it yourself." The 2 men drew their guns, and I was transported back in time. I was standing there, 2 days after Christmas, watching TJ grin and tell me the rules. Now I was standing in the woods, the autumn leaves carpeting the ground, feeling sure that it would soon drink both my blood and the girl's. "I'll give you till the count of 3 to kill the girl. After that point, you will both be executed. 1. Their guns were unwavering, but so was my resolve. 2. I closed my eyes and prepared to die. 3. I heard a sound like wet concrete splitting open. It was followed by a high-pitched scream and a pair of bodies hitting the ground. I opened my eyes and saw Stein running towards the town car, his composure gone. The two men who'd been holding me at gunpoint were bleeding out on the ground from large, grisly neck wounds. As I watched Stein run, a rust-red something snapped out and caught him in the back of the neck, dropping him inches from the town car. The red thing protruded from the front of his neck, and he gasped futilely as he lay dying. I looked back in the direction of the thing that had snapped out and saw that the girl was now a mass of red spikes, segmented like spider legs. Her face had split down long ways, forcing her face into a grisly sideways maw. The area between the teeth glowed a deep red, and I could see the eyes on the girl's face blinking erratically. The two halves of her smile grinned at me, and the effect was a little dizzying. I figured for the second time that day that I was going to die, but she scuttled off into the woods instead, walking on her strange spidery appendages as she crashed through the trees. I stood there for a few minutes, not quite sure I believed I wasn't dead, and then I started running too. I crashed through the woods for hours, running in no particular direction, sure that at any minute the creature or a helicopter from Two Trees would fall on me and either rip me to pieces or just blow me away. I was blundering off with no wallet, no cell phone, just my gun and the clothes I'd been wearing. Was the phone how they tracked me? TJ hadn't said as much, but I kind of figured it was. When the ground went out from under me, I felt the air drop out of my lungs. I fell 5 feet off the muddy ledge and skinned my hands. My knees hurt where I had landed on them, and I realized pretty quick that I had fallen onto the road. If I thought it might be an illusion, the headlights that pinned me to the ground a moment later left me with little doubt. I was kind of numb to the idea of dying at this point, and I just lay there waiting to be run over. Thankfully, the truck stopped, and after a short conversation with the driver, he offered to take me into town. That's how I came to be here in this dingy hotel that just happens to have a computer in the lobby. I sold the gun for about $500 and figured I'd disappear as soon as I'm done writing this. They know I'm gone now, but I don't know if they think I'm dead or if they think I ran. Either way, they'll find me. I'm pretty sure of it. I'm more worried about the little girl that's loose in the woods, and whatever it is that's living beneath their skin. If you see a young girl with short, dirty blonde hair, do not approach her. I don't know if she killed those men to get away, or if she killed them because she wanted to, but she should be considered dangerous if you encounter her in the wild. And if a man from Two Trees offers you a job, do not become the new curator of Black Site 7. The job is definitely not at all what it appears to be.
Man, it's really coming down out there. Seems like all it does here is rain. I was joking with my wife earlier. I didn't know that we moved to Forks, Washington, when we settled here in the mountains. But I guess the ambience is nice. This next one is from a constant contributor to the channel, CIA Herpes, writing a story about working as a security guard on an island for the global elite. After high school, having no better ideas, I joined the Navy SEALs. I never really liked any of it, but it was a job, after all. I love the guns, the airplanes, the grenades, but having to run all the time while some scumbag with a chip on his shoulder yells in your face isn't my idea of fun. Things got a lot more interesting after my term of service ended. I still had a high security clearance, so I used it to take temporary jobs as a mercenary, hired gun. I did some stints in Iraq with Blackwater, where they sent me out in the middle of the desert. A watchtower, an oil refinery looming over the burning sands. Along with a few other guys, they told us, guard the area with your life. While better than the SEALs, working for Blackwater was extremely boring. The other mercenaries and I would mostly just chain smoke cigarettes and drink coffee all night, staring out across the dead, empty desert. Over time, I worked my way up. Things started to get more interesting when a job offer arrived in my email one afternoon. This is what it said. Mr. Chase, I am the head of security for a private group of entrepreneurs and investors. Through some mutual contacts, I've heard of your professionalism and experience. We're currently putting together a small crew of guards for a private event on Redacted Island out in the Pacific Ocean that will run from January 9th to January 27th. Would you be interested in this job? The pay rate is $900 a day. Once you're on the island, it will be impossible to leave until the period of employment has ended. If you're interested, please respond to this email as soon as possible. Sincerely, Mario Antonin, Head of Security. I'd worked jobs like this from time to time, but none of them were paying that well. At most, I would usually get $350 to $500 a day, which was still good money when I was working 7 days a week, till the job finished. I instantly responded and said yes, I was interested. In response, they sent me a non-disclosure agreement that was the size of a small novel. That was how I found myself on a private jet, flying out to an island in the middle of the vast blue sea. I was never told the coordinates of the island, or saw it on a map. It was all kept very secret. A few hours later, we landed on a private airstrip. I looked out the window of the jet, seeing the tropical waters of the Pacific Ocean stretching off to the horizon in every direction. Below me stood an island with palm trees and sandy white beaches. An enormous Victorian mansion loomed directly in the center of it all. The mansion was painted black and looked like something straight out of a horror movie. It had no windows, and the turrets spiraled up into blade-like points. That was my first inkling that something might not be quite right about this trip. As the stairs to the private jet descended, I looked out on this strange new world. Employees waited to greet us, looking like beaten dogs. Some had their heads down, their eyes blankly scanning the ground. Most of them were women wearing red dresses, reminding me of stewardesses on the plane. The jet strip was surrounded by palm trees and tropical brush. The chirping of insects sounded all around us, high and resonant. I saw a strange patch engraved on all the employees' uniforms. It looked like a stick figure drawing of a man, the bottom of his body ending in a C. Its arms were long and jointed, almost spidery. 3 symbols, like repeating iron crosses, connected the left side of the body in the line. I wondered if it was the logo of some company. I put it out of my mind for now, but I'd see that symbol again all over the island, painted on the side of the mansion, and even cut into the trees with a knife. It would only be later that night that I realized its connection to Moloch. "Good day, sir, and welcome to the island," the server on my left said, with glassy eyes and a fake smile. They all looked up at once, but it was like the workers all looked through me rather than at me. Their eyes looked flat and dead, like painted-on doll's eyes. "The island, huh? They wouldn't tell us where we were going. They said it was a secret. Is that what you call it?" The woman just nodded, the doll-like smile never leaving her face. "Officially, this island is unnamed and uninhabited," the woman said. "In fact, all traces of it have been scrubbed from the internet. You won't find it on Google Maps or any other publicly available satellite imagery." She leaned forward towards me with heavily mascaraed eyes and ruby red lipstick splashed across her lips. "This is a very special place. Only very special people are allowed here. We should be honored to work here under our Savior." "I hope you're talking about Jesus or something," I said jokingly. She just smiled blankly and motioned me forward. "Just follow the trail for a few hundred feet," she said, pointing at an opening in the palm trees where logs were laid down horizontally over the muggy jungle, "and you'll find the mansion. Good luck." I thought it was somewhat of a strange thing to say, wishing a random stranger luck. By the end of the night, I realized that simply to make it off the island alive, I might need that luck. I followed the woman's directions to the back of a brutalist mansion. A heavy metal door stood there with a small bulletproof window atop it. A tan Spanish face glowered out at me, then rapidly drew back and disappeared. A few heartbeats later, the door slid to the side on a gliding of hidden gears. The head of security at the island was a heavily tattooed ex-Marine named Mario. He wore a dark Kevlar vest over his black outfit, making him look like a walking shadow. I found the security had their own private complex in the mansion, as he showed me around the site. Hundreds of hidden cameras covered every angle of the mansion, and the surrounding parts of the island, too. Dozens of black-clad security agents swarmed over the screens, checking monitors and computers constantly. "Quite a setup you've got here," I said to Mario, nodding at him. He smacked me on the shoulder, giving me a confident grin. "Money's no issue here, Richard. Security is paramount. There are things on this island that could rip apart the world if ever they escaped. I raised an eyebrow. Like what? Nuclear weapons or something? I asked, with a laugh. You'll see for yourself later, he said, his dark eyes flashing with something cold and alien. Mario led me in a couple of the new hired guns around the island. The place was certainly strange. It reminded me of some combination of secret black ops site and a playboy billionaire's private heaven. All the doors in the mansion looked like they were made of thick steel. They had wheels that would spin, like those on a submarine. The mansion also had no windows at all, at least none that I could see, except for the small shatterproof glass openings on the steel doors. I didn't want to ask too many questions, however. Couldn't resist asking him a couple of small things, though. At least, they seemed small to me. What are those hatchways? I asked Mario, pointing to the rectangular covers built into the concrete walkways. They had heavy handles. Are those manholes or something? They're tunnels under the island, just for maintenance and security, you understand. Wow, this place is certainly well developed, I said. We came out through a grove of palm trees. A stone walkway led down a white beach. Dozens of yachts were moored all across the shore, some of them looking like they must have cost hundreds of millions of dollars. There's a lot of money and power here. That's why it's important you never talk about what you see here. There are people who control the world, the ones beyond the government and the media, not the elected officials who people see, but the actual power. Like who? You mean the Rothschilds or the Soreses? I laughed again, a sarcastic, grinding laugh that grated my nerves. Trust me, the truly powerful ones don't even have public personas. If you know their names, then they're just one of the puppets. I just shook my head at that and then asked the real question that had been bothering me since I arrived. Who's the Savior? I asked. Is that some code name or something? Mario froze in place. He's the one who runs everything here, he whispered conspiratorially, looking around nervously. But don't be mentioning that kind of shit here. You'll probably see him tonight anyway. He's the one who runs the show. He'll be on the stage in his normal outfit. By the end of the day, I was suited up like the rest of the security staff, wearing the pure black pants and shirt with the symbol of Moloch engraved over the heart. Hundreds of the world's most famous politicians, actors, businessmen, artists had gathered, streaming in the front gate with a lot of soft, quiet chatter. I stood by the open doorway of a side exit with my AR-15 and body armor next to one of the other soldiers. They had also given me a sidearm. Every entrance or exit was manned by at least 2 armed men. The security at this place was some of the most intense I'd ever seen. Beyond the door, there were rows after rows of the most comfortable seats, all gathered in a semicircle around a massive stage made of pure mahogany. Blood-red curtains stood closed in front of the room, concealing their secret, for now at least. I heard the elites inside calling out their praise for Satan. I didn't want to look at the rows of high-ranking politicians, celebrities, influencers, and what have you, but my curiosity was high. I peeked around the corner of the stone archway, seeing the red curtains on the stage drawing apart. Saw one of my favorite actors standing in the front row, clapping excitedly and jumping up and down. The crowd cheered as a naked female, strapped to an obsidian altar, lay there. She was beautiful, blonde, probably no older than 20, with the face of a supermodel. Her mouth was gagged, her arms outstretched like Jesus on the cross. Thin leather cords were tied around her wrists and ankles, biting deeply into the skin. Her eyes rolled wildly as she shook her head from side to side. She froze as her eyes met mine for a brief moment. I saw the pleading expression there, the mortal terror, the absolute horror. A man in a goat mask wearing black robes slunk out from the side of the stage, carrying a wavy silver dagger engraved with strange symbols. The crowd erupted into a primal roar of pleasure and excitement that sounded like it came from a monstrous mouth. "Worthy is the Lamb," the man in the goat mask screamed with electric amplification. He had a deep voice, as if He had rocks rolling around in his throat. The crowd roared and clapped. Scattered cries of "Hail Lucifer" and "Ah, Satan" echoed from the massive auditorium. "Hey, pay attention," the other security agent said at my side with a thick Finnish accent. He was a tall Scandinavian guy named Kolmek. "You're not getting paid to watch the show, new guy." I tried to rip my gaze away from the stage, but it held my attention with the obsessive horror. "The burnt bones of children and women have been offered to the Ancient Ones, to Moloch," the man on the stage said. "Under our feet, the burnt bodies of hundreds lay dreaming. This victim will be the 666th. Her body will bring about the Genesis we seek, the direct experience of the divine held by the gods, by Lucifer and Moloch and Baal." The roaring of the crowd temporarily drowned out the electrified magnification of his voice. "Tonight, we will rip open the veil." I had stopped watching the show, instead staring blankly out at the beach and the palm trees. At that moment, another black-clad security agent came up to my partner, whispering something in his ear, then immediately disappeared, heading off back in the direction of the main security office. Kolomek shook his head grimly. "I'll be right back," he said. "Stay right here. Don't move from this door no matter what. And pay attention." I nodded and watched as he walked off in the same direction. I immediately took the opportunity to continue watching the ceremony. I'd missed something important, apparently. The woman now lay dead on the sacrificial table, a gaping hole in her chest. Blood spurted from the crater as the man in the goat mask held her beating heart grasped tightly in his hands, letting the blood stream down his naked fingers. The crowd cheered with a rising bloodlust and insanity. Most of them were standing, their eyes gleaming and wide with fanatical adoration. The entire spectacle reminded me of some kind of ancient Aztec ritual. As the woman's sightless eyes stared vacantly up in death, the man in the goat mask pulled out a can of gasoline. The clear liquid gurgled as he upended the canister over her pale, bloodless face, over her naked stomach and long legs. A moment later, he lit a match and dropped it. I heard the whooshing of the flames as they rose up. The crowd went deathly silent as they watched the rippling flames. The man in the goat mask began chanting in some strange language I had never heard before. Sounded Semitic, but I knew it wasn't Arabic or Hebrew. I felt something like electricity ripple through the air, almost like a feeling of falling pressure before a storm. I looked down at the hairs on my arms, seeing them rise up. I looked back up at the stage, and my eyes widened in horror. The flaming body of the sacrificial victim had started to morph before my eyes and the eyes of the crowd around me. The dripping, blackening flesh jumped up and down, as if there were rats trapped in her body trying to escape. There was a deafening hissing, as if 1,000 snakes were being burned alive. The dead woman's arms jerked up, the skin splitting open as if she had seams running along her skin. Something dark and muscular with curving black talons ripped its way out of the dead, burning flesh. Behind it, a head appeared with long, curving horns and eyes that spun with whirls of fire. It looked like the offspring of a bull and a demon. Its imposing body rose from the inferno, appearing like magic from the solid stone. It raised itself to its full height, looming over the crowd, the last of the woman's blood hissing and boiling away as her flesh dissolved into ashes. "Behold, Moloch rises!" the man in the goat mask screamed in fanatical joy. The crowd's cheering had stopped, though. Many of the faces in the crowd looked chalk white with terror. A bull god surveyed the crowd, its horns nearly scraping the ceiling 20 feet above the stage. At that moment, I knew death was on its way, with eyes of fire and a grin like a skull, ready to reap the field of human bodies. I heard running behind me, but I didn't dare turn away from the horrific sight. The last of the fire's embers died, sending up thin wisps of gray smoke that spiraled around the bull god's monstrous face. Moloch stood as still as a statue. If it weren't for one thing, I might have thought it was some sort of sculpture or an art project. He had 2 nostrils like a serpent's. As his great lungs inhaled, the smoke billowed in and out of his mouth and nose. Some of the people at the edge of the crowd had gotten up, hurrying towards the door. Moloch's head ratcheted to face them, his fiery eyes narrowing into slits. "Do not leave," the man in the goat mask pleaded. "Those who have fear are not worthy of life. Do not prove yourselves unworthy of life." As the first of the fleeing men and women got to within a few steps of the door, Moloch gave a primal roar. In a blur of strength, he reached down and ripped the blackened sacrificial altar off the stage. It ripped from the wood with a tremendous crack, like a bullwhip. He hurled the heavy mass of stone at those heading towards the opposite exit, the one I was guarding. I watched it curve through the air. The people started screaming and clawing to escape as it smashed down on their heads with a grating crash. I could feel the floor shake from where I stood outside. Blood exploded from their smashed bodies. I saw arms and legs jerking and seizing under the heavy stone, but within a few moments they slowed and stopped. Others were running towards the exit, but Moloch leapt off the stage in a blur. In a few bounding steps, he reached the pale, terrified faces on the outside of the threshold. His massive clawed hands came down. I heard bones shatter as blood sprayed my face on the wall. Bone splinters and pieces of brain exploded from the screaming bodies. I backpedaled, wiping my eyes, trying to get the blood off so I could see. No one had told me what to do in this situation. I didn't know if I was supposed to shoot that massive thing or if this was all just part of the show. "Richard," a familiar voice cried from behind me. Panic oozed from every word. I spun, seeing Mario and Colomek standing side by side, their pupils dilated and their expressions grim. "We have a major problem." "I know," I said, holding my rifle tightly. I pointed behind me at the scene of rampant death and destruction. I'd seen bloodshed and war before, but this was different. The island itself seemed to feel it. The wind, which had been calm when I first arrived, now whipped the island in a fast circular motion. The breezes smelled of burnt matches and coppery blood. The static electricity, which had caused the hairs on my arm to rise, rippled over everything, with tiny blue flashes, increased in power by the second. "No, not Moloch," Kalak said, looking calmer than I felt. "The Savior lets Moloch thin the herd every year. It's Leviathan, the beast from the water. It smells the blood and is drawn from the depths of the ocean. We picked up the first blips on the radar a few minutes ago. When it gets here, it won't stop until everything is rubble. It'll kill everyone on the island." "All security personnel must report to the South Beach immediately," a cool robotic voice cried out over hidden loudspeakers all over the island. The screaming from the auditorium had quieted behind me. I was afraid to look inside. "There it is," Colmack said, his head jerking up as the emergency alert sounded. "It's time to fight," he said, motioning me to follow. We sprinted over curving trails of smooth logs between deadly quiet forests. All the insects and birds had gone silent. Ahead of us, the palm trees opened up onto the Pacific Ocean, but it was no longer a beautiful tropic blue. A black, swirling whirlpool, like an ulcerous wound, had opened up on its surface. It stretched hundreds of feet across, drawing closer to the shore by the second. Dead fish, sharks, dolphins, squids, even whales spun in the filthy dark water. 20 black-clad security agents waited for the 3 of us on the beach, their eyes wide, their faces pale with terror. Like myself, they all had AR-15s and Glocks with extra magazines for both. I guess the Glocks might be useful for blowing my brains out if it was a last resort, over being eaten by some hell beast, but I didn't think it would stop anything from another dimension. The clouds swirled overhead in a thick curtain as black as smoke.
Flashes of blue lightning detonated every couple of seconds. Mario raised his hand, screaming over the roaring of the wind. Kolomek stood by my side, his face grim and his eyes narrowed. "Your job is to fight off anything that tries to get on the island," Mario said, looking from one face to another with rapt attention. "Nothing can stand against high-caliber rifle fire. Shoot at the face and eyes when it comes up. We've dealt with creatures like this before, and they will retreat if you injure them badly enough." I had the sense of being fed a line of bullshit as my mind processed this. "What exactly is coming up?" one of the doe-eyed security men asked. He barely looked old enough to drink, a young, muscular hulk with a Marine Corps tattoo on his neck. "It is called Leviathan. Sometimes the ritual here and the smell of blood can draw strange things. Leviathan is one of those. We have encountered it before. Most important thing to remember is..." His voice was suddenly drowned out by the terrible cacophony that came from the center of the whirlpool. A screech like the detonation of a nuclear missile shook the ground. The ocean jumped and bubbled frantically. The beach heaved and creaked, the white sand disappearing in fissures that opened up like greedy mouths underneath my feet. I lost my balance, falling forwards. The screeching continued, rising into a primal roar. A green dragon head, the color of an infected wound, erupted from the surface of the thrashing water, rising up dozens of feet in the air. It had two enormous slitted eyes that dilated and constricted quickly, as if glowering down at us. The screeching abruptly stopped, the pointed mouth of the dragon slamming shut with a sound like a gunshot. Within moments, another cancerous green head shot up in a blur, its skin looking as hard as stone. Ridges that looked as sharp as swords ran the length of its reptilian skull, arcing over its eyes and pointed snout. More heads erupted from the ocean, until all 7 of Leviathan's heads loomed over us. Not one of us fired. Not one of us even seemed to breathe as we surveyed the beast across the no-man's land of white sand. The slitted eyes and yellowed irises of the 7 heads had a demonic hunger, a reptilian coldness. Far behind us, I heard a distant scream still echoing from the auditorium where Moloch held sway. "Fire!" Mario cried. Instantly, a cacophony of gunshots exploded all around me. I jumped to my feet, scrambling up as the 7-headed dragon leapt forward. Thousands of gallons of salt water streamed down its massive body as it came up on the beach. Long black paws with bone-white talons shot out of the surging ocean, followed by a tapering tail like a water snake's. I brought the rifle up and emptied my magazine as fast as I could, pulling the trigger over and over as I aimed at the many slitted eyes of Leviathan. The bullets seemed to ping harmlessly off its hard obsidian scales, though. It scrambled onto the shore, its heads coming down in a blur, rows and rows of vampiric fangs gleaming dully in each of its mouths. One security agent was bit in half, the spurting stump of its lower body still standing for a long moment, even as the rest of the body disappeared down the throat of the dragon. Mario ran forward, slamming another magazine into his rifle and opening fire point blank. One of the heads came down in a blur towards him. Its great staring eyes exploded in a shower of blue blood and thick viscous fluid. The dragon's head pulled back, its mouth opening in a primal scream of agony. As I reloaded, I scanned the area around me, realizing that nearly half the security guys were either dead or critically injured. I backpedaled away, keeping my eyes on the dragon. It continuously drew forward, killing more of its enemies with every step. I turned and ran for the forest, the sounds of shattering bones and dying men ringing through the air with a sickening clarity behind me. Once I'd reached the borders of the trail, I heard Mario yell, "Retreat!" behind me. By that point, it was too late, though. "Hey, wait up," a voice whispered from behind me. I turned my head, seeing Kolomek. Spatters of drying blood covered his face and uniform. As far as I could tell, none of it was his. Mario's dead. They're all dead. We need to get out of here. We need to get off the island. How? Find the Savior, he answered, panting and out of breath. We must find him. He can get us out of here. I don't even know what the guy looks like. He was wearing a goat mask. You'll know him when you see him. His body is covered in scars, everything except his face. Stay close to me. We need to watch each other's back. It's our only chance of survival. A trail of twisted, broken bodies led from the mansion to the surrounding trails of the beaches. A decapitated woman with a solid gold necklace embedded with diamonds lay in front of me. It was strange on the island, the way oblivion and ineffable wealth coexisted side by side. Everything was deathly silent now, even in the mansion's auditorium. "Where's the Savior?" I asked through gritted teeth. I peeked my head into the auditorium, but nothing moved. Hundreds of smashed and bloodied bodies littered the floor. "He's around here somewhere," Kolomek answered. He started circling the mansion, looking for signs of life. Kolomek took the lead. As he turned a corner, an enormous black hand with sharp claws of fingers flitted towards us in a blur, wrapping itself around his chest. Kolomek gave a strangled cry as it closed around him. I heard the bones crush as a spout of blood and gore flew from his mouth and nose, as if it were a toothpaste tube being squeezed. I backpedaled away as Moloch threw the twitching corpse aside like a discarded toy. It smashed into the wall of the mansion, exploding wetly, a human-shaped, bloody stain languidly dripping down the wall above Kolomek's mangled body. Moloch slowly turned his head towards me, the fiery eyes flashing with hunger. He gnashed his fangs together, taking a step forward with legs the size and shape of tree trunks. With every step he took, I felt the ground tremble. "Stop!" I cried, moving away from the monstrous creature. "Why are you doing this?" "There is no why," he gurgled, his voice monstrous and inhumanly slow. "There is only power. The weak deserve to die. Only the strong are worthy of life." I raised my rifle in a last-ditch effort to save myself. Moloch saw it and started running towards me, every step crushing the paved walkway around the mansion into rubble and dust. I aimed for his eyes and nose, emptying the entire magazine as quickly as I could. The bullets smashed into Moloch's face. Dark red clotted blood dripped out of the wounds, writhing with maggots. Drops of it fell around me, landing on my hair and face. I felt the small larva twist all over my skin. Moloch's blood smelled nauseating, like some combination of stink bugs and rotting bodies. He slowed, giving a roar of pain. I turned to run in the opposite direction, but as I looked out in the direction of the beach, my heart dropped. Leviathan was moving in our direction, the giant dragon head looming over the trees. Quickly, it swept towards me, like a dark wind. "You will suffer for that, worthless slave," Moloch growled, wiping blood from his fiery eyes with his sharp talons. A sudden idea came to me. I ran in the direction of Leviathan. Moloch followed closely at my heels, only a few steps behind. Leviathan slithered towards us over the sand and trees, its enormous body undulating like a water snake's. I screamed at it incoherently. Its 7 heads snapped towards me. Its slitted eyes widened as it saw Moloch. I heard the crashing of Moloch's footsteps behind me, only feet away from crushing me into paste. His massive lungs heaved, breath coming quickly, exhaling the odor of sulfur and smoke. "Leviathan," Moloch growled in his demonic voice. "These are my tributes." Leviathan's dragon head looked straight up at the sun and screamed in response, their many voices rising and falling in a dissonant wail. As I sprinted into the trees, Leviathan and Moloch ran at each other, colliding with an ear-splitting crash. I glanced back, seeing Moloch ripping one of the dragon's heads off its neck with his sharp fingers. The head screamed as blue blood erupted from the stump. After a moment, the neck fell limply forward. The other dragon heads bit Moloch in a unified attack,
They ripped deep holes in his shoulder and arms, snapping over and over like rabid dogs. As the two eldritch monstrosities attacked each other in a fierce battle, I lost sight of them, but the sounds of fighting echoed over the entire island, crashing like lightning. I felt like the survivor of an apocalypse. I couldn't find a single other living person on the island. Hundreds of crushed, broken, and decapitated bodies surrounded me. Over the cacophony of fighting, I heard a new noise, the whirring of a helicopter nearby. It was coming from the other side of the mansion. Frantically, I sprinted towards the other side, seeing a Black Hawk helicopter getting ready to land. A man in black robes sat in the pilot's seat, his green eyes gleaming as a wide smile spread across his face. I smashed my fist into the door over and over until he opened it. "Holy shit, you're still alive?" he asked. I hadn't seen this man before. He had a face like a Calvin Klein model, all sharp angles and high cheekbones, perfectly proportioned in every way. But his scalp looked melted and scarred, as if someone had thrown gasoline on his hair and ignited it. His eyes were stunted, twisted growths of scar tissue. His hands, too, were covered in deep, folding burn scars. Are you the Savior?" I responded quickly. "Please get me out of here." "They call me that," he said wistfully. "The Savior, yes, I guess I am. Get in." The Savior stared at me with his strange green eyes, the color of swamps where monstrous things swam under the surface. "Some people just need to learn the hard way," he said. The helicopter took off into the dark night, covered with bright twinkling stars. "There is no great power without great responsibility, after all. Those of us who seek the Ancient Ones know it comes with a cost." I just stared out the window, gazing down at the countless mutilated bodies that littered the beach. Below us, the face of the bull stared up with eyes of fiery cyclones. The broken, still body of Leviathan lay at its feet. As we made it over the great waters of the Pacific Ocean, the bull god raised its hand and waved. At that moment, I thought I could almost see a hurricane of translucent souls circling around him, spiraling up into the sky. Well, thunder sounds like it's getting close. Or I suppose it's the lightning you really have to worry about. Let's hope we don't lose power, though there's nothing quite like telling spooky stories by firelight. This next one is another one from yours truly, about a man pulled into something he doesn't quite understand by an organization that is as faceless as it is shadowy. So let's hear a little about Howard's song. The smooth jazz buzzed through his ears as Howard finished correlating the numbers for his latest job. The Baxter account was coming along nicely. Howard felt quite sure that he would have the account books done before quitting time. It had been a hard job. Mr. Baxter had not kept good records, but he had finally chased down all those loose ends, and Howard cocked his head like a dog that's heard a sound he can't quite place. Had someone been calling him? The smooth jazz he always listened to when he worked was devoid of words. Words tended to distract him while he was working. He shook his head and got back to it. The account was nearly done, and he had a meeting in an hour to finalize it. He'd give his boss something to crow about this time. Charles Baxter was a very wealthy man, and his business would do wonders for the company. Howard bet his boss would give him a bonus after seeing all the excellent work he'd... Howard! Howard turned to look behind him. Someone had said his name, almost spoken it in his ear. As he looked around, he was perplexed as to where it was coming from. Looking back to the computer, he began to type again. His nerves were a little rattled at the thought of a disembodied voice and... Howard! Howard jumped and nearly overturned his chair. Someone had shouted his name, screamed it right into his ear. Even now, as he looked around his home office, he could see no one. Howard lived alone with no wife or children or roommates to distract him, and the thought of someone in his house made him very upset. This was his home, his place of refuge, and as he started to rise from his chair, he resigned himself to search the whole house until whoever was here was found. He had just opened the closet when the voice spoke again. "Sorry to startle you, Howard. Now that I've got your attention, I need to talk to you." Howard stared dumbly into the closet.
The old jackets and blue storage bins did not begin to speak to him. No one sprang from concealment either to admit to the disturbance, and he came to realize that the voice was not coming from the house. The voice was not an intruder, or a disembodied ghost voice, of which he did not believe in. The voice seemed to be coming from his earbuds. The voice was that of an average, everyday person. Howard could have sat next to him on the bus, or chatted with him in line for his morning bagel. The voice was smooth, educated, and not too terribly unlike his own. This made Howard feel a little easier, a little calmer. As he stood looking into the coat closet, he felt less worried about home invaders, and more concerned about why someone in his earbuds knew his name. "Wonderful! Now that I have your attention, I need you to leave the house." That struck Howard as odd. Not that anything in this situation was expected, but leaving the house? Howard worked mostly from home, always had after his employer had determined that it was better for his productivity. As such, he had maintained a rigorous schedule. He really only left the house to get groceries once a week, and to visit a certain woman he liked. Their relationship was based on cash exchange only, of course, but he still had a schedule, and he liked to stick to it. "You are in great danger, Howard. Men are coming to hurt you, men who don't want you to finish this account, and if you're still here when they arrive, I fear you won't live to see tomorrow." This filled Howard with unease. Who was coming to hurt him? Why did they care so much about the Baxter account? "I know this must be very upsetting to you, Howard, but I need you to do exactly as I say, so we can get you out of this troublesome situation. Take all the relevant information you have on the account and put it into your briefcase. Take the hard drive out of your computer, the silver box on the second tray, and put it in there as well. You can just yank it right out. It should come free. I need you to do all of this in the next 5 minutes and be at the bus stop before 2 o'clock. Go on, get started now." Howard felt himself hesitating. Who was this voice? Why was he talking to him? How did he know that this wasn't some trick to get him to screw up all the data on his computer? Still, years of being an accountant drone meant that he had already begun to scoop the papers into his briefcase, even as he thought things over. He was used to following orders, and really, this was just one more in a long line of orders. The side of his desktop came off easily. He had saved his documents, of course, and powered it off. Now he had the case open, though, and the nagging voice asked again if he thought he was doing the right thing. This was crazy. He was going to yank a piece out of his computer just because a voice in his earbuds told him to. How did he know he wasn't being fooled? How did he know he wasn't having a mental breakdown? For all he knew, he had created the voice, which hadn't spoken in about a minute, and now he was getting ready to break his computer. "Quickly now, Howard. They're on their way," the voice said, not showing the slightest bit of interest one way or another. Howard reached in, feeling the heat from the components, and gripped the hard drive. He lifted it out of the cradle, but instead of yanking, he detached the cables and easily brought the box out. He looked at it as it ticked and cooled and put it in his briefcase. He closed the case, grabbed his hat from beside the door, and left his house. "Don't bother locking up. You probably won't be back," said the voice in that who cares sort of way. "Now, walk down to the bus stop and sit with the wall blocking your view of the house." Why wouldn't I come back to my house, Howard thought, but he moved to the bus station without really thinking. He was running on autopilot as he came to the bus station and just sat down. The longer he sat, the longer the voice remained silent, the more he doubted that it would come again. A woman with a bratty kid sat next to him, and he clutched his briefcase on his lap. The kid looked up from his gadget, a box that was spewing noise at an ear-splitting level, to tell his mom that he wanted McDonald's when they got wherever they were going. She just patted him and said she would. The kid turned his grubby face back to the gadget then, and gave no more thought to the conscious world whatsoever. That was when Howard saw the car. The black town car drove right past the bus station and into his driveway. 4 men in black suits climbed out and walked towards his door. One of them knocked, 3 loud clumps, and they all waited for 30 seconds in a state of impatient tension. They all had sunglasses on and shiny black shoes. Howard thought they looked like government agents in a spy movie. As he peeked around the bus station wall, he saw one of them drive that shoe right into the door after receiving no answer. As they filed in, he thought he saw them reach into their coats for something. But the voice came back just as a big silver bus pulled up in front of the stop. "Never mind that, Howard. It's not your concern anymore. Just get on and take the bus to the number 12 stop. You can do that, can't you?" As Howard flashed his bus pass and took his seat, he found that he could. He rode the bus for the better part of an hour. He kept a firm hand on his briefcase, and as he rode,
His eyes kept sweeping around to look at the other riders. The bratty boy and his doting mother were a few seats away. The kid hadn't looked up from his gadget since he'd spoken to his mother, and she seemed to be busy watching the world go by. An older woman was sitting up near the front with the driver. Her clothes made him think that she might be homeless, and a young man with headphones on was sleeping near the back of the bus. The flashing sign near the front said that they were nearing stop number 4. If the stops were in some kind of order, it would be 8 more stops before it was his turn to get off. He glanced out the window as they drove, the bus stopping occasionally, but rarely picking anyone up. The voice in his earbuds hadn't spoken for a while. He was again beginning to wonder if he'd made the whole thing up. Here he was, on a bus, with his work and his hard drive in a briefcase like some kind of spy. Maybe he had been working too hard. Maybe his boss was right, and he really did need to take some time off. I don't want to alarm you, Howard, but it seems that the men in the town car are following you. Howard bristled. He turned his head slightly and could see the black town car in traffic behind the bus. The windows were polarized, so they couldn't see in, but they certainly knew where he was. It would be easy to find out if he had come onto this bus. He didn't exactly blend in, and then what would they do? Would they gun him down on the bus in front of all these people? Would they arrest him? Why were they after him? I need you to get off at the next stop, Howard. Don't hesitate. Don't look around. Just step off the bus and take the alley to your left. Howard pulled the handle over his head, and when the bus stopped, he calmly walked out onto the busy sidewalk. The doors closed, and the bus rolled on into traffic. Behind it, the town car followed, being none the wiser that Howard had gotten off. He scanned the crowd and found the alley to his left. He took it, clutching the briefcase as he walked along the garbage cans. He didn't see anyone lingering around, and as he came out onto the other side of the busy street, he began to relax a little. There were no black town cars waiting for him, and that gave him some small amount of reassurance. Now, cross the street and take the next alley to the number 12 stop. There will be a taxi waiting for you there. Take it to your destination. Howard glanced around, unsure until he finally saw the alley. It sat between an Italian restaurant and a computer repair store. Howard could see the large green dumpster that took up most of the lane, and knew it would be a squeeze to get around it. He started across the busy street, and was met by the sounds of horns honking and people cursing. He hurried across like a frightened rabbit, and made the alley before the screeching tires had stopped. The alley was awash with graffiti and the old smells of pasta. Someone had hung some band poster on the wall, but it did little to add to the place's charm. The dumpster was a stinking edifice of green and chrome. Howard was no dainty flower, but he shimmied around it with very little problem. He winced when his stomach rubbed against the filthy dumpster, but he was clear a moment later, and nearly out of the alley. "Stop," the voice said, and suddenly Howard was against the wall. He made himself as small as he could, and saw the black town car pull up next to the bus stop. "Don't move. Just be still, and they won't see you," said the oily voice in his ear. The man who had kicked in his door stepped out of the car. He bulged in his suit, a mountain of muscles, and Howard had little trouble believing that that man so easily booted in his door. He stepped out and walked to the bus stop. The bus Howard had departed, pulling up and offloading the few passengers. He looked hard at the mother and the brat, the child sticking his tongue out at him, and at the old lady who shuffled up the street. The bull stepped onto the bus and looked around, exchanging words with the driver before climbing off. He and the man in a taxi had another conversation, his town car blocking the sidewalk, which ended with the taxi honking and cursing and speeding away. The town car left a few seconds later, and Howard breathed a sigh of relief. A new taxi pulled up a minute later, and the driver asked Howard if his name was Howard Kernst. Howard climbed in, and they pulled into traffic. They drove until they hit the city limits. Howard had expected to go uptown to one of the glass edifices that marked the government buildings or the high-scale holdings. He had expected to be greeted by a man in a suit who would tell him that he had done well and explain all this. Instead, they drove into the desert. The driver didn't speak, he just drove. Howard was becoming nervous. The men in the town car had been one thing, but what if the man in the earpiece was worse? He tested the door and found that it was locked. He checked the windows and found that they wouldn't open. He tapped on the glass, but the man behind the wheel ignored him. "Patience, Howard," the man soothed. "All your questions will be answered soon." Howard settled a little, but as they drove deeper into the desert, he began to wonder what was happening. Howard was just an accountant, a great accountant, but still an accountant. Things like this didn't happen when you were just an accountant. You might get a paper cut or stub your toe on an average day, but certainly not get yourself involved in clandestine conspiracies or life or death struggles. Hell, the files he had from the Baxter account weren't even that interesting. Baxter owed a lot of money to the government, had a lot of back taxes, but Howard had managed to clear that up. His orders had been to make the problem go away, and he had. When the car stopped, Howard was jerked out of his contemplation. They had stopped outside a rundown gas station in the middle of nowhere. Howard must have been wool gathering for longer than he thought, because the sun was dipping low in the sky behind said station, and the afternoon was beginning to sink into evening. A sensible black sedan was parked in front of the gas station, and as they approached, a man opened the door for Howard and ushered him out. The man was wearing a black suit, much like Howard's pursuers, and his sunglasses reflected Howard's scared face back at him as he climbed from the taxi. The taxi driver accepted an envelope from the man, neither speaking a word, and the cab pulled away, leaving Howard and the man standing in front of this rundown gas station. "Right this way, Mr. Kernst," said the man, and the two walked towards the station. It was a tatty thing, gas pumps gone all brown and flaky, the glass crashed out in the windows, a single spindle rack spinning sluggishly in the wind, with a single bloated magazine on it. Howard had seen 1,000 of them in his time, utterly forgettable, and he feared to die in a place like this and become as forgotten as the old station. The thought was sudden, but he couldn't get it loose as soon as he had thought it. He was like a dog who's finally caught his tail and now can't let it go again. Howard was suddenly sure that this would be the place he died. The two walked around the back of the station, and there was a man in a folding chair, a beach umbrella covering him from the sun. He was dressed in a white suit, little blue piping roaming up the jacket. He had a fat, jolly face, hair the color of snow, and a pair of sunglasses with some reflective lenses Howard had become used to seeing. He smiled when he saw Howard, and the smile was genuine and warm. He pulled an earpiece out as they approached, and spread his pudgy arms wide as though to hug him. "At last, Mr. Kernst, at last you've arrived. May I call you Howard? It seems silly to rest on formalities after we've been through so much." Howard didn't trust him from the instant he opened his mouth until the end of his life. The man had a showy way of speaking, like a carnival barker or a snake oil salesman. He was the kind of man who turned everything into a Shakespearean presentation. He thought himself a showman, but really, he was just dramatic for the sake of drama. Howard hated people like that. The man seemed to pick up on some of his distaste. "I imagine you have 12 questions, maybe 24, and I want to answer them all, but I fear we don't have time. The biggest question I assume you have is why these men are chasing you, yes?" Howard nodded a little sullenly. "Well, the answer is quite simple. The men are, of course, my own." "Yours?" Howard asked, perplexed. "Of course. You see, if you had something I wanted, and there was no sense of urgency, you might start to ask questions. You might question the voice that suddenly popped into your head. You might not have come all this way into the desert on my order if I hadn't made the stakes a little high for you." He pulled a cigarette out of a silver case he had in his jacket, and Howard flinched when he saw the case come free. For half a second, he had seen a small silver handgun come out of that jacket, and he knew his life was about to end. The man flipped the case closed, but offered it to Howard before he put it away. Howard declined, and the man slid it back into his pocket with the same disappointment. The man who had escorted him from the taxi stepped close, flicking an expensive lighter and holding it to the end of the cigarette. Howard considered running into the desert while he was occupied. Catching a bullet in the back, however, did not seem much better than dying right here. "Now then, I imagine you'd like to know why I went to all this trouble to get the papers you have in your briefcase. Well, that's a little more complicated. You see, Charles Baxter has made some very important people very angry. He's made enemies out of the kind of men who don't really get mad. They get even. And in 22 hours, he will cease to exist forever. He will be erased from life, erased from memory, and erased from time." Howard gaped. Who was this guy? How exactly did you go about erasing someone from time? Charles Baxter was a fat cat around here, probably one of the most prominent businessmen in 3 states, but surely he was small potatoes in the grand scheme of things, right? So, as you can see, it's very inopportune for you to have files that prove this man existed at all. Charles Baxter is already dead. His associates are, as we speak, being ferreted out. You, Howard, are the last loose end we need to tie up. But why kill me just for having this information? The man shrugged noncommittally. Because it's easier than having you reprogrammed. At the end of the day, you're an unmarried accountant whose absence will go unremarked. You have no family, no real friends, not even any pets to mark their bowl's emptiness. You've lived an unremarkable life, Howard. Your death will be much the same. He threw the cigarette into the sand, half smoked, and held his hands out towards Howard. Now then, the case, please. It was said nice enough, but Howard knew that it wasn't a request. The man was used to giving orders and having them followed, and for a moment, Howard thought about refusing him. He would die here. He knew that, but maybe he could die with some dignity. Perhaps he could die having fought against something that didn't seem right. He held onto the case for a few seconds, not sure what he meant to do with it, but in the end, he found himself handing the case to the man under the umbrella. At the end of the day, he was just an accountant after all. The man accepted the case, smiling, and this time the hand that came out of the suit coat did contain a small silver handgun. Thank you, Howard. You've been very helpful. The gun went off, and Harold felt the slug enter his body. It burned for a few seconds, then he felt nothing. Howard's life ended in much the same way he had lived it, without much fuss. You can hear it really coming down out there. Glad I've got a nice, cozy place to sit and stay out of the wet. This next one is from Suspicious Nail 949, someone we haven't heard of much in a while, but maybe we'll stumble across one of his stories again. It's about a pair of FBI agents that work for a very special division.
I was recently recruited for the U.S. government, and today I'm preparing for my first case. We're investigating a company called Rawson Global, as reports have been surfacing that they're performing unauthorized and illegal genetic enhancements on animals whose meat they mean to sell. From that introduction, you may assume I work for the FDA, maybe the CDC. Both assumptions are dead wrong, though. I work for the FBI. My name's Dexter Watson, and to be more specific, I work for the supernatural branch of the FBI. And yes, before you say it, I'm well aware that such a branch doesn't exist. We, as opposed to one of those other, more mundane organizations, were called in because these genetic enhancements may have crossed over what we call the Clarkson threshold. I'm not sure when we call it that. I'm still pretty new here, but it describes the invisible line separating the things the public knows from the things we prevent the public from knowing. The FDA, the CDC, they're below the Clarkson threshold. As I said, I'm still pretty new here, though. I was a junior in college last year when they recruited me. I was at Penn State on a football scholarship, the only way I could afford to attend college, and they had been putting me through a few tests that I didn't actually know were tests when they were happening, which was rather frightening to say the least. Regardless, I passed them all, and I was informed of my passing by an unmarked envelope. Also included in that letter was an offer. Meet them at a disclosed location for a job offer. It was as simple as that. There was no figure given, no description either. The only information at all was provided at the bottom, and it was a modified version of the FBI logo. It was like the normal logo, all except the red and white striped insignia on the front, where normally it's just blank. On this version, there are two things in front of it. There was a sort of oblong ovular shape running diagonally, and crossed with it was a large rectangle, with various sections of it jutting out to give it kind of a clunky look. No one's told me what either of them represent as of yet. If I'm being honest, I'm not really sure why I took the job. Maybe it was because I was tired of doing nothing with my life. Maybe it was the allure of a high-paying job with security. Or, hell, maybe it was because I wanted to help people. Whatever the reason, I met them at the location, and after hearing the details of the job, I accepted. 3 weeks of vigorous training and briefing later, I'm here, 2 days away from my first mission. It's a routine one to be sure, as while genetic enhancement sounds exciting and dangerous, they hardly ever turn out to be, at least so I'm told. They say we usually catch on to them before they get out of hand, as genetic engineering leaves a pretty obvious energy signature, at least when one knows where to look. I've been partnered with Scarlett Gill on this one, an agent who joined right around the same time I did, and as a result, we were together through the majority of our training. We spent quite a bit of time together as a result, but very little time is allowed for personal talk during the 3 introductory weeks. We're working out, drilling, joking together, and we'd even come to like each other a little. but neither of us has been allowed to know a thing about the other's personal life until the training was complete. We're together now, Starrlight and I, as we pass the night before the job. She's certainly nice and enjoyable enough to be around, but more importantly, she's loyal. The FBI seems to enjoy making us believe we're in life-threatening scenarios when, in fact, it's merely another drill, something we enjoy significantly less. But every time they have, Starrlight's had my back. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked, noticing my introspective attitude and raising an eyebrow at me. "Afraid you wouldn't be getting your money's worth. It's just a little weird. These past 3 weeks have been kind of a whirlwind, and the most boring thing we've done is find out about this assignment." "I'm still holding out hope we're going to run into some kind of mutant chicken or something," she joked. "Maybe even a man-eating cow." Are we really lowering our standards for excitement to man-eating cows? I mean, even I wasn't that pessimistic. "Whatever," she said, rolling her eyes and leaning back in her chair. "I'm just ready to get out of this place, to see some people again. Maybe the CEO will be some cute single guy who just needs the right girl to get him back on track. Maybe I'll meet the man of my dreams on this mission." "Don't get your hopes up," I teased. "I mean, it's Maine. You can't expect Ben Affleck." "Oh," she asked, "and I assume that Jennifer Lopez is just waiting for you, right?" "Something like that," I said, nodding and laughing. We both joked, sharing some pre-mission banter, but in reality, there would be no matchmaking during this mission, and we both knew it. We would be arriving unannounced, and there was no telling how anyone at the company would react. Sure, it was just your average check-in to keep them honest, but what if they panicked? It wouldn't be the least unlikely thing that would happen. As the laughter trailed off into silence, Starrlight finally said, We should probably get some sleep. It's a long drive to Maine." "Sure is," I agreed. Both of us being rookies on a routine mission, we hadn't been deemed important enough to garner a full flight. So, we were stuck driving one of the old clunky SUVs the Bureau kept, to the best of my knowledge, for the sole purpose of hazing. So, yawning a bit, I bid her good night, and we retreated to our respective bunks for the evening. March 20th. I'm not usually prone to nightmares, but I had one last night. I was in a forest, I think, and a faceless man stood in front of me. Behind him and to his left was a wild horse, bucking and neighing loudly. It was surrounded by thorns, and every time it reared back on its hind legs, it came down, impaling itself on them. To the right was Starrlight, bound at her hands and feet. I didn't know what was going on. I tried to ask him, but I found that I was frozen in place, unable to move or do anything as the faceless man looked down at me tauntingly. I woke up in a cold sweat an hour before my alarm set off, so I quietly showered, got dressed, and walked outside, allowing the brisk morning air to fill my lungs. It was always calming being out this early. It put it all in perspective. The assignment was just an assignment. My dream had just been a dream. The base we were at was tucked away in the White Mountains of New Hampshire, by far the most beautiful place I'd ever seen in my life. As the sun rose in the east, I leaned on a railing overlooking an immense horizon. Mountains dropped off beneath me, only to pick up in the forest that spread out below me. After what must have been miles of forest, the first rays that would eventually become the blazing ball of light that was the sun peeked out at me. I took a deep breath, then exhaled. I always wondered why they wasted such a great view on a military base. A voice from behind me surprised me, causing me to jump. I turned around and found Carmen Clay, my direct supervisor, who, coincidentally, had been promoted to her post at around the same time Starrlight and I arrived. She walked over to the railing and leaned on it as well, looking out across the horizon. So much natural beauty. Contrast is the stark coldness of the Bureau. It's two different worlds. I cleared my throat and agreed with her. She looked at me for a moment. "You have something that not a lot of people do, you know. You know how to talk yourself off a ledge, and that'll get you a long way in this department." "Thank you, ma'am." She gazed down at the forest for another moment before continuing. "A wise man once told me that for every one thing that goes right on a mission, 10 things are bound to go wrong by the time you're finished celebrating. Remember that." I let her words sink in as she returned to the main compound. At first, it just seemed like she was getting in on the fun of piling on the new guy, but that didn't at all fit with what I knew about her. There was more to what she was saying than just to poke fun at me. Starrlight was awake a half hour later, and a briefing followed not long after. The briefing was relatively short. We already knew most of the details. It was just some general information that hadn't been covered yet. Then we were off, just like that. There was no send-off, no hearty goodbyes. The briefing ended, and we were on our way. It was a 3-hour drive to the Rawson headquarters in Old Town, Maine, and I drove the first half, with Starrlight picking up the back end. The conversation remained light while it was alive, which wasn't the majority of the ride. But still, there was general optimism, and I could feel it as we drove. First, we passed the sign informing us we'd entered Maine, a milestone achievement very early on in the journey. Then we passed through Bethel, then Skowhegan, then Bangor, and finally, we saw the signs for Old Town. Our massive, bulky SUV stood out in the small town, even as we neared the center of industry that was Rawson headquarters. All the vehicles up here were small, either tiny sedans or, for the more wealthy people, little convertibles or sports cars. We towered over almost everything, and word spread fast in a town like this. People wondered why we were here, and they weren't shy about asking. We drew some stairs, and the closer we got to our destination, the more people I saw take out their phones and dial a number when they saw us. When the third person did so, I pointed it out to Scarlett. "Someone's getting advance notice that we're on our way," I told her, gesturing back to the man on the phone. "They're a tight-knit community here, so much for the element of surprise." "Not a great sign," she said with a nod. "If they've got people out to let them know when someone is coming, they've probably got something to hide." With that, we came into view of the massive, sprawling complex. Rawson headquarters was a sight to behold. The main entrance dominated by a huge statue of the company's logo in the middle of a U-shaped driveway. The front of the building was a large glass room, but at the height the sun was in the sky, we couldn't see into it yet. The glass rose up to more than 2 stories high, then dipped back down before turning into cement and rising up into the offices in the first level. It was only 6 stories high, but its size came in its width. We had just reached the far edge of the building, and we still had nearly a quarter mile to go to reach the entrance. The headquarters seemed big enough to be its own city. "Why would anyone need this much space?" Scarlett murmured, echoing my thoughts. As she approached the driveway, she asked, "Do we just park here? I don't see a lot or anything. We've got government plates. It's not like they're going to tow us. But that's definitely weird," I concurred. She pulled into the driveway behind the fountain, parking the car in front of the front doors. There was a surprising lack of activity as we approached the glass doors. Ours was the only car in the long driveway, and as we approached, we seemed to be the only people making our way into the building. As we entered, we saw that it was empty, save for the receptionist at the desk. I glanced curiously at Scarlett, as no greeting came from her, and we slowly let the doors close behind us. "Hello, ma'am," Scarlett said, her voice echoing around the silent lobby. "We're here with the FBI. We'd like to take a look around." There was no response. It was a large lobby, and it took us some time to get closer after several more unsuccessful attempts at communication. Our footsteps on the tiles filled the otherwise empty room as we made our way towards the desk, and then, as details became clearer, it was obvious that something was off. The receptionist had a blank look on her face. She wasn't asleep, yet still she didn't reply. We hadn't noticed until we got far enough away from the front windows, but the lights were out. We both felt the oddness of the situation, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw Scarlett's hand drift to the butt of her pistol, preparing to draw it at any moment. I did the same. When we arrived at the desk, she still hadn't reacted to us. Something was definitely off. Wordlessly, I moved my hand in front of her eyes for a moment. Nothing. Then I held the backs of my hand up to her nose. I glanced up at Scarlett. Nothing. She's dead. Dead? What the hell? Why is she still at the desk? Maybe she had a condition, I offered. Call it in. I'll check for a medical bracelet or something. Scarlett nodded and retreated back a few steps to report to our supervisors. I made my way around the desk. There was nothing to show she had some sort of medical condition, but it wasn't long before I found the cause of her death. When I tilted her body forward, a bullet wound slowly oozed blood. It was a small hole, most likely a pistol caliber, and when I opened her shirt, I found the exit wound. Someone had cleaned it up, though. "What the hell?" I mumbled. I looked back at Scarlett, but she was still fiddling with her radio. When she saw me looking, she said, "Damn thing won't work. I'm just getting static. What's the deal with her?" "She's dead," I replied. Looks like someone knew what they were doing. They cleaned up the front of it, so..." Then it clicked. We both came to it practically simultaneously. I vaulted over the desk, making for the door access to the long lobby, and as I did so, the metal safety grate began to slide down. Its gears ground loudly as it slowly began the process of cutting off our path to freedom. Scarlett had a head start, having already been on the other side of the desk, and she reached the door when the grate was still almost a foot off the ground. She pounded on the glass with her fist, but after that was unsuccessful, she slipped her gun out of her holster and fired it into the glass once, twice, 3 times. However, the bullets didn't penetrate. The glass was bulletproof. "Damn it," she mumbled, slamming the butt of her gun onto the glass. I caught up with her at that point and looked through the thin slit that had allowed the lights in through the grate. "What the hell's going on?" I breathed, shaking my head. "We're stuck in here," Starrlight said, and she looked around the lobby. For a moment, her words echoed faintly down the dark room, and we let it sink in, taking stock of our situation. Something was going on, something that someone was willing to kill to keep under wraps. Whoever it was very wealthy and very intelligent. They had not only known to jam the radio frequencies, but had the means of doing it, and they were either in possession of power at the company or commanded enough respect to lead enough people to establish this lockdown. I had narrowed it down to either the CEO or a head scientist, with the CEO being the more likely of the two, but this was all in the first minute of having this knowledge. "So what now?" Starrlight asked, sliding her gun back into her holster. "There's only one thing we can do. Find out what they're trying to hide." "Are you crazy? This was supposed to be a routine checkup. We're not equipped to get in a gunfight. For all we know, a terrorist cell could have taken this place hostage, and they're armed to the teeth." I nodded. Outside assailants were a situation I hadn't thought of. "Well, what else would we do?" I asked. "If we want to escape this place, our only way is into the looking glass." "I don't like that metaphor," Starrlight noted. "But yeah, I suppose you're right. And if we're going into the deadly genetic engineering lab, we might as well do our job," I finished. She nodded. "So much for Ben Affleck and Jennifer Lopez," she muttered as we began to walk to the hallway that would take us to the rest of the building. The lobby was set up so that the receptionist would be able to have seen anybody attempting to enter the complex. There was no furniture, not even a potted plant, just cold white tile and then the desk. Behind the desk were two doors, one on the left and one on the right, and we learned in the briefing that each led in a different direction. To the left was the business end of the headquarters, decisions, accounts, and computing occurrences. To the right was the science portion, laboratories, testing chambers. That took up the majority of the real estate there, and that was where we were heading. If an answer lay anywhere in this darkened house of death, we believed it would be there. So I took point, and we entered the looking glass. The lights were still out in the hallway, and it was nearly impossible to see. Starrlight pulled out her flashlight, the thin beam piercing through the darkness and lighting up a tiny area of the hall. It wasn't much, but it was better than pitch black. The suffocating darkness surrendered a little to help us piece together the mystery. For the most part, it was just a white, sterile hallway, without any form of decoration. Every so often, we'd see something that looked a little off. A dark smear on a wall, a fluorescent light casting that had been torn out of its original shell and smashed on the ground, but for the most part during the first hallway there was nothing. However, when we reached the end of it and arrived at a door, things began to ramp up. The door was the same material as the rest of the hallway, and had it not been cracked slightly open, it would have been highly likely that we wouldn't have even noticed it. Upon closer inspection, I saw that there was a thumbprint scanner on the right of it, and it must have utilized electronic locks, which would have gone out whenever the power did. "Do we go in?" Starrlight asked. "I mean, we're already gone this far," I replied. "What's the worst that can happen?" "Don't say that. You know that never ends well," she said. I rolled my eyes and pulled the door open further, allowing us to look in through the entryway. The room appeared to be a testing chamber for genetic engineering. About 10 feet in there was a glass wall with a heavily secured door in the center, leading to an airlock, and then to an area where the tests were performed. There was a table with straps on it, several cages in the corner, and then a chair with straps on it too. All were splattered in dark red. I groaned slightly at the sight, and then the smell hit me through the airlock. It hit me like a ton of bricks, and I kneeled over as I tried not to retch. The smell was putrid, and I thought there was no way I was going to make it any further. I was about to say something when Starrlight beat me to it. "What's wrong?" she said, pointing her pistol around the room to check for danger. "Are you okay?" You don't smell that?" I said, tears in my eyes as I mercifully became adjusted to the smell. "God, it's rancid." "Smell what? It's just blood." "There's something else. There must be a body in here or something. It's starting to fade, but you're telling me you can't smell that at all?" "No," she muttered. "That's strange. Come on, let's see if we can find anything in here." I followed after her, figuring maybe the smell had dissipated by the time she got into the room, and not really seeing anything weird about it. The blood was dried. It looked like it had been there for days, and it covered virtually every surface. As I circled around, trying to find any semblance of a clue to what had happened, I spotted a camera in the top right corner. I was about to point it out to Starrlight when suddenly a noise from behind us caused us both to freeze. It was a scratching noise, like a small animal burrowing around. That was in the corner that we hadn't searched yet, of course. and it was obscured by the initial view by a small wall that cut off the glass viewing room, so we had no idea it was there. The scrabbling continued, noticeably muffled, and then there was an odd squish. The noise paused for a moment, and I slowly turned my head to lock eyes with Scarlett. The unspoken agreement was to turn and pump whatever was back there full of lead, and we held our breath for half a second. Then we whipped around the corner, firing round after round into it, the burst of light obscuring the dark corner from our view. After a few moments, I stopped, and she followed. I shined my flashlight into the corner and saw the bloodied, shredded, unrecognizable lump. Whatever had happened to it, it was long dead before we had gotten there. "What the hell made that noise?" she whispered. I didn't respond. We stood there in silence for a moment, neither of us wanting to be the one to volunteer to investigate the pulp. "Fine, I guess I'll do it," I finally relented, reluctantly returning my gun to my holster. "But you owe me one." She rolled her eyes, and I cautiously approached the lump that glistened sickeningly in the light of Scarlett's flashlight. Upon closer inspection, I could almost make out that it had been a human torso. However, it was destroyed. All the skin, at least the skin that would have been facing up, had been torn away, explaining the bloodied appearance. There was only one arm left, the left one, and it was tucked under the body until I pulled it out again. It was clenching something in its hand, a slip of paper, it appeared, and I attempted to pry it loose. "Hurry up," Scarlett urged. "I think I heard something out in the hall." "That's just your imagination," I replied, tugging on the paper. It was wedged tightly, and the person must have had an iron grip. Then, just as the paper slid free, something burst out of its back. I stumbled backwards, crying out as the thing leapt at me. "What is it?" Scarlett exclaimed, her attention having been focused on the entrance to the hallway. As I recovered from my initial shock, I realized the tiny ball of fur was just that. Tiny. It looked like a rat, a decently sized one for sure, but there was something wrong with it. I didn't have much experience with rats, but the way it walked, the dull look in its dead little eyes, something was off. "You big baby," Scarlett teased, helping me up after she picked the rat off of me and tossed it into the corner. "What, you scared of a little rat?" "Something's wrong here," I said. "I don't like it." Scarlett glanced around at the carnage. "Really? You have a team of monkeys working around the clock on that one?" "The rat, it wasn't normal," I said, ignoring her sarcasm. "This place, why is it covered in blood? That was a human body. What happened to it?" Then I heard what Scarlett must have heard earlier. There was a sound of someone, or something, pounding on metal. 3 dull thuds, then a hollow groan permeated down the hallway. "Is that—" "Yeah," she returned in an equally low tone. "Whatever it is, it's between us and the exit." Wordlessly, I drew my gun again, nodding at the door, and we cautiously crept back towards the hallway, out of the testing chamber. As we left, the rat scurried off behind us, startling us a little. With that, we set off. The unspoken agreement seemed to be that if whatever had made that sound earlier did it again, we would be going to investigate. Chances are, we would be spending an undesirable amount of time with it anyway. I figured, why not get acquainted with it? Obviously, I wasn't keen on meeting the thing, and I only wanted to do it if the opportunity arose. I was kind of hoping internally that we wouldn't run across it. However, as it often does, my hopes were unfounded. Before we'd even reached the halfway point, a terrified shriek came from the door we had just passed. Then, before we could react, something slammed into the glass porthole at the top of the door. I jumped back, training my pistol on that 8-inch circle of glass as whatever it was dragged across the clear surface, smearing what looked like blood across it. I held a finger to my lips as Scarlett glanced at me, and she nodded. There was no movement for a moment, so I slowly approached the door and reached for the knob. Whatever was behind the door let out a mighty roar and then slammed its head into the window. I must have jumped a mile at the noise, and I quickly regained my wits, aiming my gun back at the small viewing port into the room. What I saw was disturbing, to say the least. Though it was pressed up against the glass and slightly distorted by it, I could tell it was human, or at least it had been at one point. It had stringy black hair that was matted down with blood that streaked across the glass as the creature pressed harder and harder against it, trying to break through. Its skin was a human shade, but it was stretched and waxy, looking as if it had been torn like paper. Then there was its eyes. The emotion, or lack thereof, I'd seen in the beady eyes of that rat was amplified 100-fold in the eyes of this creature. There was nothing, 2 empty pits, devoid of color and life, entirely black. There was no iris, no white. It was just pitch. As it continued pounding on the door, much to our horror, several more groans and thuds began emanating from all around the hallway. There were more of those creatures, all throughout the hallway, and worse, not all the doors were locked. "Come on," I shouted over the din. "We gotta go." We began running down towards the lobby. Hands groped out at us through the darkness, one of them even flailing as it attempted to body check me, but no serious threat was proposed at us until we were 10 feet from the exit. One of the doors flung open at that moment, and I ran directly into it. I was momentarily stunned as it knocked me off my feet. My gun fell out of my hand, skittering off into the darkness. I heard Scarlet utter a curse as she was about to start shooting at the thing, when suddenly one of them grabbed me from behind. I shouted for help, still disoriented, trying to attack the creature that was grabbing me. She whipped her head around, and in a moment of distraction, one of them had opened the door and took hold of her. She slammed her elbow into its guts and prepared to duck under the grasp provided by its reaction, but it had none. Instead, it reared its head back and sunk its teeth into her upper arm, tearing at it aggressively. She cried out in pain. Meanwhile, I was just hardly avoiding a similar fate. I'd managed to get a position of leverage on the head of the creature, but it was strong and untiring. I could feel my strength giving way when suddenly I heard the door burst open ahead of me. Initially, I thought it was more of the creatures emerging to snuff out the last remaining bits of fire in us. I thought that was the end, and I closed my eyes, lessening my hold on the creature's head. Then, instead of jaws and death, I heard a dull clunk and felt the weight lifted off me. I opened my eyes to see that the creature had been sent stumbling backwards, a series of dents in the center of its face. Get up! Get up!" a voice shouted, a figure appearing in my vision, extending a hand to help me. "Come on, we gotta go." I accepted his help, and the first thing I noticed when I got to my feet was he was wearing a surgical mask. Then I noticed that he was carrying a crowbar. Seeing my confused look, he said, "I'll explain later. We gotta get out of here." "Wait," I protested. Scarlet was still struggling feebly against the creature that had bit her in the arm, and I rushed over to her, grabbing onto the creature's head and prying apart its teeth. "Go, go," I hissed to Scarlet. Free from the thing's maw, she made for the exit immediately, and I followed not too long after, once I had stunned the creature sufficiently that it wouldn't follow us directly. However, during that time, the way to the exit slowly began to close as more of the creatures pressed in. With a sudden burst of adrenaline, I sprinted forward, bowling over two of them, and when one lunged out at me, I grabbed his wrist in a hold I knew so well I had practiced automatically and snapped the flimsy bones. Then I dove for the exit, tucking my body into a roll as I passed through the opening. When I did so, our masked savior slammed the door shut behind me, sliding in several deadbolts I hadn't noticed before. They seemed hastily installed, and I guess they hadn't been there until those creatures were. Breathing heavily, I slowly made my way back to my feet. Scarlet was sitting against the reception desk, clutching her arm as it oozed steadily. The man in the mask finished locking up, and then turned back to face me. "What the hell is going on here?" I panted. "I suppose you're with the FBI," he remarked. "I'll explain everything, don't worry." "Well, perhaps you should be worried, but for different reasons." "Yeah," I said, sucking in air. "Clearly. You're going to want to come with me. I could explain everything here, but trust me, it'll be much easier if we can get everyone together." The walk to the rooms they'd established as their base was a strange one. The building seemed so normal. It just looked like an after-hours office building. I'd judged by this time that night had come on the first day. Most of the rooms looked undisturbed, as if someone could step right in and get right to work. However, the deeper we got into the business section of the building, the less and less likely that became. At first, it was just the little things. A desk would be upturned, blocking the door, or a potted plant had been knocked over, spilling the dirt across the carpet. But then it took on a darker turn. Occasionally, dark blood would be smeared in gory streaks across the wall, or a corpse would lie unattended on the ground. Windows were shattered, the carpet was torn up, the wall fixtures lay in shambles on the floor. Little things, little aesthetic touches. Then we entered the final hallway. At the end of the hallway, there was a sealed door that led to an elevator. From the blueprints I'd studied, I knew it led to the higher corporate offices. But we didn't go that way. Instead, we entered the conference room in the middle of the hallway. When he opened the door, he looked back at us, seemingly in thought for a moment. "You'd had better wait out here. Just a precaution. Don't worry. They've never made it this far. I'll come and get you in just a minute." "Glad to see you're rolling out the welcome wagon," I said, but he'd already entered the room. I helped Scarlet sit down and slid to the floor myself, not before taking a peek into the conference room, though. It was a dismal sight to behold. There were about 20 people in there, all in various stages of grief or despair. Some huddled in groups, others sat alone. Still others sat at the table, tending to the 4 wounded people who lay bleeding in the large conference table. Some of the people wore surgical masks, though most didn't. The man who'd saved us was in deep conversation with 3 of the 4 others, standing close to the entrance, away from the others. I glanced over at Scarlett and saw through the darkness that she was crying. I thought better of making small talk, and we waited in silence for about a half a minute. Then she was the one to break it. We're in over our heads. We have to find a way to contact someone. They have to come and find us. I'll talk to this guy, but we can't get hysterical. We need to keep our wits about us. We knew this was a possibility. Well, not this, but something of this magnitude. We're prepared. We can handle this. What makes you think we can handle this? What have you ever gone through in life that makes you assume you can handle this? At that moment, though, the door swung open, and the man who'd let us in emerged. I was grateful for the distraction, since I truly had no answers. "All right," he said, "I owe you an explanation. My name is Jace Morrison. I was the director of product management with Rawson. Since there's quite a bit to cover, I'll open it to you from the very beginning. What do you want to know?" I looked over at Scarlett, but she had already begun to ask, "What the hell were those things? Did they have to do with the genetic engineering that was going on here?" Yes, they do," he sighed. "They were the product of what we're calling IM01 disease. Those things, they used to be human. And to your second question, yes, it does have to do with genetic engineering. We're still not entirely sure how, but it's believed that one of the test subjects had an undiscovered dormant genetic trait that was set off by the experiments. That trait reacted negatively to testing, producing IM01. I'm sure it could be explained better, but the people you just met are in the best position to explain it to you." "So you were experimenting on humans?" Scarlett asked. "This is worse than I thought." "What is IM01? How does it spread? What are the effects?" I asked, signifying that he didn't have to answer that rhetorical question. IM01 is an airborne disease. However, it dies very quickly unless it finds a host. If it does so, it slowly begins to take over the host's body until it has gained complete control, at which point it rewrites the brain to amplify aggression, delete pain receptors, and reduce logical thought. The process generally takes about 12 hours. At least, that's what we've seen. And visible signs that the host is infected will not begin to show until approximately the 10-hour mark. "Can it be transferred once the host is converted?" I asked, nervous that it could have been transferred during the scuffle with the creatures. "There's only been one instance of it, and it was after the creature had reached full maturity, which takes about 24 hours after the transformation is complete. At that point, the disease becomes fortified, being able to survive indefinitely outside the host, and is present in the creature's very breath." I looked at Scarlett and saw that she'd reached the same conclusion I had. "You knew about this, then?" she asked accusingly. "You know too much about it. You knew about the consequences, but, if I may guess, you chose to test the creatures and the disease instead of reporting it. Then an outbreak happened, and now you're here." "Yes, but I assure you, the decision was entirely Mr. Rowan's himself. I'm sure you're also curious about the radio blackouts, security gates, and the unfortunate death of Miss Naomi West. That was all a result of the paranoid CEO, Andrew Rian. He was the one that ordered the genetic research in the first place. And when he did so, he installed several measures that would ensure the headquarters could become entirely self-sustained in the event that such an event did occur. He had since separated himself from us. He locked himself in the corporate suites, where he just so happens to have full control over all the security measures, at least the ones he can power with the backup generator. However, before he or those loyal to him retreated, he knew that he was going to have to deal with the inspectors, such as yourself. So he shot Naomi. He cleaned up the wound and propped her up in the chair so that you would approach, giving him sufficient time to activate the security gate and the frequency jammer. He's entirely delusional. His goal is to wait out the death of every single living thing in the building, and then to continue with operations as normal. There is nothing we can do. We cannot put our lives above that of the entirety of humanity's, as if we were to make an escape attempt, the risk would be too great that the IM01 would follow us, and I'm sure I don't need to explain the consequences of that. We've managed to secure all the creatures we know of in the experimental hallway. There are certainly a few that continue to roam unabated. Now, we currently don't have a method of determining if a subject is or isn't infected, so if you two would spend the night in another office, perhaps? "Oh, sure, of course," I said. "I mean, is there anything you can do about her arm? I think the bleeding stopped, but an infection would probably be deadly." He held his breath helplessly. "We have no medical supplies. If you've already stopped the bleeding, that's about as much as can be done." Scarlet nodded grimly, and without another word, he left, returning to the conference room. She looked over to me as the doors closed. "You still think we're ready for this?" "It's worse than we thought," I said, repeating her sentiment from earlier. "You know how we're going to get out of here, though, right?" she asked. I grinned weakly, looking down the hall at the sealed metal door. "I sure do." Despite her pessimism, she had retained that calculating mind that helped her so much during training, and we remained on the same page. "Come on, help me up," she said. "I'm not sleeping out here. Let's find a nice office or something." The information having lifted our spirits, if only slightly, I lifted her up and walked her around for a few minutes before finding a suitable office. Then, as I helped her to lie down on a rather plush couch, she paused, looking curiously into my eyes. "What?" Then the curiosity turned to fear. "Give me your flashlight," she ordered. "What's wrong?" I asked. "Just give it to me," she exclaimed, and I hastily retrieved it, handing it over to her. She clicked it on, then shone it into my eyes. "Gah!" I exclaimed, shielding my eyes as the sudden burst of light blinded me. "What's that for? Put that thing away." "Show me your eyes," she demanded, and I opened them, squinting into the harsh light. "Dexter, your eyes," she trailed off. "What's wrong with my eyes? What's going on?" "They're black," she replied. "What do you—" I began, and then the realization hit me. Scarlet slowly propped herself up on her good arm and inched back away from me. "Stay back," she said, a look of fear in her eyes. "What? I'm not a—" I replied, trailing off. I slowly backed away from her, touching the skin on my face. It might have just been my imagination, but it almost felt waxy, like the skin of the creature. What's happening to me? What's going on? Jace said it takes 12 hours to convert, didn't he? "You'll be fine until then," she said, but her voice wasn't very convincing. Even less convincing was the hand that slowly made its way down to her hip, where it rested against the butt of her gun. I'll go get him and let him know." I nodded, pacing back and forth nervously. I didn't feel any different, as I would have expected someone suffering from a mind-altering virus to feel. The only thing was the paranoia that now set in. Would the creature still attack me? Or would they accept me as one of their own? The darkness was suffocating. It surrounded me, and it felt like I couldn't breathe. I was disoriented and panicking. What could I do? What was there to do? If I allowed myself to become one of those creatures, would I kill Scarlet? The seconds until she was back with Jace felt like hours, but she finally came back and explained the situation. "Well, he's definitely not contagious, so you don't have to worry about being near him, at least for now. But there's not much else I can do to put a positive spin on this. We have no idea what a cure might look like, and even if we did, there'd be no way to make it unless we somehow had all the ingredients here in this building. God, how could I have forgotten about the eyes?" "When did I get it?" I asked. "How come Scarlet doesn't have it?" "Did you ever smell something really pungent? Something that smelled so bad it almost made you throw up?" Jace returned my question with one of his own. "Probably around the testing chamber, if you'd gone that far." "Yeah," I said, recalling the smell. "Right when we walked in. It faded after a bit, though." "What happened?" "That was it. The virus has a distinct smell, and once you smell it, there's some time to escape, but if you adjust to the smell, then by that time it's already gotten inside you." "But how come Scarlet didn't get it? Did all the virus go into me?" Jace glanced at Scarlet without saying anything. Then he gasped. "Wait, did you smell it?" "No way," she replied. Jace leapt up in the air with a shout, pumping his fist. "Thank Jesus! There's hope!" "What? What is it?" Scarlet asked. "You're immune," he replied, grabbing her by the shoulders. "When the scientists were testing it, they of course accounted for immunity. They said something about how the scent of the virus was impactful, that an early sign of immunity might be an inability to sense it. Him getting affected while you didn't. It seems highly likely that you have some kind of immunity." "Really? That's incredible," she said. "Can we use it to help Dexter?" Jace let out a long exhale. "There may be a way. It'll be hard, and if it were just for you, I wouldn't do it." "So generous," Scarlet muttered. "That sounds harsh, I know, but it involves us taking back the corporate office, and that means getting out." "What's in the corporate office?" I asked. "The head scientist. She wasn't in with Rion, not completely, but Rion took her by force in the event that a scientist was needed. Her name is Julia Russell. She has access to the early tests of the cure. None of them were successful, but given the proper antibodies, I was told they could have worked. So the antibodies might be in my blood, Scarlett asked. Exactly, but we're working against the clock here. We've got 8, maybe 9 hours, and then it'll be too late. The cure won't work once Dex has already turned. Don't suppose you have a plan, do you? I asked, and for the first time a smile crept across my face. I was hoping you'd ask, Jace said. March 21st. The plan was relatively simple, in theory at least. Scarlett and I would crawl into the upper floors through the ceiling. Then I'd search for the scientist, and she'd activate the elevator, allowing reinforcements to follow in case something went amiss. Once we had the scientist, he'd aid us with the serum, and after adding Scarlett's blood, I'd be cured. Then we could make contact with the FBI, and hopefully make it out of this wretched place. We spent the last half hour or so going over the plan, as blueprints of all the floors and the ventilation systems were accessible from the office we had access to. Now, we're just getting ready to go. How does it feel? Scarlett asked as we set out from the office, beneath the floor tiles we'd eventually climb through. I don't know. It's almost normal, but sometimes I feel something inside of me. It might be me thinking about it too much, but it feels like it's rising up. And if I don't push it down, it'll take over. She nodded, not replying verbally. I had begun to relax about it. I knew I was on the verge of getting the cure, and not a lot could go wrong at this point. Chase had told us that Rion's pistol was the only weapon up there, and one man with a pistol would be no match for us. We'd been trained numerous times on specific scenarios, and knowing the exact floor plan certainly wouldn't hurt our chances. It was about 5 minutes before Jace came through again. He knocked on the door as he entered and said, "We're ready when you are. How are you holding up?" I knew the question was directed at me. Well, I haven't felt hungry for human flesh yet. Other than that, I'm perfectly fine. I saw the corner of his mouth turn up in the darkness. It's good to keep your humor. It helps retain your humanity. Well, you're good to go whenever. You know the way, after all. And with that, he returned to wait with the team he'd selected to aid us in our mission. He wasn't one to mince words. He said what needed to be said and nothing more. I'd only known him for a day, but even I could tell that. I pushed myself off the table I'd been leaning against and said, "We might as well get going. There's no time like the present." Scarlett was equally ready, at least externally. "Agreed," she replied, and we began the cumbersome process of entering the ventilation shaft above our heads. A ladder had been produced from the supply closet, but the hardest part wasn't getting in. It would be distributing our weight sufficiently so that we didn't collapse half the system simply by hanging for a minute too long. It took 2 of us 5 minutes to get up, but we did so without disaster. And then the doubly cumbersome process of slowly shuffling our way through the cramped metal space was underway. We'd memorized the directions to get there, but there was still the possibility of missing a turn or forgetting a drop just ahead, so we crawled in utter silence, focused entirely on the task at hand. I was brimming with confidence as we neared the final destination. The final trial we had to surmount before entering the upper floor was a difficult one, a 20-foot vertical shaft that we would have to climb using nothing but the force of our friction. I arrived at the wall earlier than I'd expected, my hands brushing against the black wall a few steps before I'd anticipated. "We're here," I hissed, back to Scarlett to avoid unwanted collisions. "All right," she whispered. "Don't fall on me. It would be a shame to have survived a zombie attack only to be killed by my clumsy partner." "Whatever," I said, rolling my eyes in the darkness as a smile spread across my face. I felt the air above my head to make sure I wasn't going to bump into anything, and stood. For a moment, I just stretched my legs, readjusting to standing, and then I prepared for the ascent. I considered for a moment sticking my flashlight in my mouth, just to provide some sense of security, but decided there was no need. Like the rest of the vents, I had the vertical shaft entirely memorized. I positioned my hands on either side of my body, pressing them against the walls of the shaft as I tested its give. When I was ready, I pushed off, lifting my feet off the ground and beginning to climb. It was a strenuous effort, inching my way up, minute by grueling minute. By the time I was halfway up, my arms and my legs, my torso, they all ached. But I didn't falter. I knew a lot rode on my shoulders, but I also knew I was more than up to the task. As I remained calm and collective, I shuffled my way up into the upper echelons of the building. 20 feet may not seem terribly high, but using the method of travel I was using, it took a considerable amount of time to traverse the distance, and the clacking sound of the ventilation system shifting around made it feel longer. But I did reach the top. When my hands finally felt the ledge, I let out a sigh of relief. Confident as I had been, Confident as I had been, there was always a chance that something could go horribly wrong, and I was glad that it hadn't. Then, of course, it did. A shriek like the one from the testing room emitted in the darkness, and a hand soon followed. It latched onto my hand, attempting to pry my grip from the ledge, and it nearly succeeded. However, I managed to grab on with my other hand at the last minute, saving myself and Scarlet from a very painful drop. "What is it?" Scarlet called as I grunted, struggling to pull myself up before the creature could impede my progress further. Unwilling to spare effort for response, I quickly lowered myself a small amount, then instantly pulled back up, using the excess momentum to knock the creature's legs out from under it. The gamble worked, and the thing slammed its head into the metal vent, stunning it momentarily. I used the temporary break to jump to my feet and call back down. "There's a creature up here! Hurry!" The vent was taller up here. I was able to stand, but just barely. It was still dark, but I could make out several forms further down the vent. "Come on, there's more of them!" I picked the stunned creature up off the ground and slammed its head into the wall before planting a foot on its back and sending it sprawling towards the others, then extending a hand to help Scarlet up. "What's going on? Why are they here?" "I don't know, but it can't be good. Let's deal with them first, then we'll think about it." She nodded, and we ran forward into the group. There were 5 of them, including the battered one I'd dealt with, and Scarlet immediately sent a spinning kick into one of them, sending it tumbling to the metal floor. I stepped on in and leapt forward, sending a punch at the throat of a second. I made contact and prepared to duck another return swing, but it never came. Instead, it turned to go after Scarlet. Without hesitation, I tackled it, slamming it into the wall, but it didn't seem to make an effort to retaliate, simply struggling against my hold and continuing after Scarlet. She was busy dumping 2 creatures over the edge. "They're not going after me," I called to her, the reason why slowly dawning on me. I bent down, picking up the creature, and hurled it over my head in the direction of the ledge. It landed hard on the floor, as I wasn't strong enough to clear the ledge, but its momentum carried it the rest of the way. "They must sense I have the virus in me. They're completely ignoring me." "Lucky you," Scarlet muttered, as the 2 remaining creatures advanced on her. "Give me a hand with these 2, would you?" I jumped into action, launching a spinning back fist at the one that was nearest me. The blow glanced off its head with little damage, but it stumbled to the side, and I gave a mighty push as it was off balance, knocking it into the other one. The second one I was pushing over the ledge, but the first managed to barely keep its balance, teetering on the brink of the abyss. Scarlet finished the job, planting a kick heavily into its chest, and watched as it disappeared into the darkness. We quickly began to make our way to the vent we'd be making our entrance through. And as we walked, Scarlet asked, "Does that mean you're making the transition?" "I don't know. If not, I'm probably getting close. We'd better hurry." We ran the rest of the way, and when we made it to the vent, I quickly pried it open and lowered myself through. It struck me immediately as odd that the lights were out. It was dark as it had been in the lower levels. When Scarlet lowered herself down beside me, she noticed the same thing. "This isn't good. You don't think the creatures could have—" "How would the virus have gotten up here?" I asked, knowing the question she was going to ask. "Unless the scientists or someone in the lab area." The thought faded unfinished into the darkness. "Let's get this over with," Scarlet said. I began to wish I had some form of communication with her, or anyone to be honest, but it was impossible with the radio blockage. Before I could think twice about it, though, she was gone, and I was alone in the dark hallway. I touched the wall to get my bearings and set off for the main office where Jace believed the scientists were being held. I walked quietly, willing to accept the delay to avoid a large delay if someone or something heard me. Everything was empty. There was no sign of life anywhere, nor were there any signs of death we'd seen downstairs. It was just empty. I hurried through the halls, unwilling to test fate after our experience in the vents, and after some time I arrived at the innermost office, that of Andrew Rawson. The entrance was lavish, consisting of 2 massive wooden doors, a traditional entryway with a very modern security, and what I assumed to be a retinal scanner to the right of the door in evidence. The doors were at the end of a long hallway. Even through the darkness, though, I could tell that something was wrong. It was pretty easy to see that they were wide open. That wasn't a good sign. I guessed that there had been an outbreak, and as opposed to seeking out the creatures, the survivors had made their last stand in Rawson's office. They evidently hadn't fared too terribly well. I cautiously approached the once luxurious office, and as I did so, the feeling of lurking evil within me rose, stronger than it had ever been. It knocked me to my knees, and I felt dizzy as I attempted to suppress it. I fought hard, making my way to my feet, as I knew there was quite a bit riding on me. As I examined the surroundings, fighting the feeling that my head was swimming, I realized that the office, perhaps, wasn't the best word to describe Rion's workspace. It seemed like a headquarters in of itself, as the room I was looking into was more like a lobby. I could see 4 hallways branching out from where I stood, which I had seen in the blueprints, but it was very different now that I was looking at them. All of this, just for one man. A mental picture of him was beginning to form, and it wasn't someone I thought I could get along with very well. Regardless, I followed Jace's instructions down the middle hallway. This also happened to be where the multiple blood trails seemed to be leading. I was about 10 steps down the hallway when I heard the first clunk. It came from somewhere ahead, and I froze, but nothing followed it. I knew I could do nothing but push on and hopefully be prepared for whatever arrived. There were several doors on either side of me, but I ignored them. Not only were they utterly empty, but my goal was in the deepest parts of the office. Jace had assumed, apparently correctly, that they would have tried to put as much space between themselves and the initial outbreak as possible, and that they would be tucked away in the deepest recesses of his office. When I finally did come across it, unlike the rest of the offices, it wasn't very luxurious. Just 2 plain doors. There were several corpses scattered about, but I knew I was running out of time, so I didn't waste any of it on them. I tried the handle, and it was unlocked, but when I pushed, the door wouldn't budge. I paused for a moment, considering my options. Then I stepped back, ready to kick it down. However, before I could, one of the doors flung open, revealing a woman in a tattered white lab coat who was pointing a gun at me. "Who the hell are you, and why didn't they attack you?" she asked. "What? I'm an FBI agent. Before I could finish my explanation, a massive surge of darkness rose up, nearly blotting out my vision. I once again fell over, but this time I couldn't stand up. "You're infected, aren't you?" she said, brandishing the gun at me. "I don't have the cure. I wish I did, but the formula is incomplete. If I had the cure, do you think we'd still all be here right now?" "Don't shoot," I groaned. We have the missing piece. My partner, she's immune. Go inside. Get a dose ready. She'll be here any minute." The virus racked my body, and I began to convulse violently. Then my rational brain lost control. I remember vague images from that time. The scientist slamming the door shut. I imagine she barricaded them after, then various flashes of hallway, and the other creatures as I wandered around the darkened floor. I didn't go too far from where I'd left, and the next thing I remember was Starrlight running down the hallway. The creature that I had become joined the crowd that followed her, and she fired several times at us, one of her bullets clipping me on the leg. Thankfully, it incapacitated me. Otherwise, I might have persisted, and something bad could have happened to one of us. The creature crawled for some time, but I eventually gave up. The next thing I remember was the lights turning on. The creature must have an aversion to light, because it felt incredibly painful. The creature cowered there on the carpet. Then with a jolt, I returned to consciousness. "Gah!" I shouted, sitting bolt upright as a sharp pain in my arm brought me back to reality. The events of the day quickly coming back to me. I looked down at my hands and saw that the gray was quickly fading. That's when I felt my cheeks, and the skin was warm and smooth. I looked around, Starrlight smiling, seeing the color returning to my eyes. "It's over. We made it." "Thank God. I was getting a little worried there for a minute," I groaned. "What the hell happened?" "They had shut down the power. I couldn't activate the elevators, so I decided to come back to you. But when I got here, it was just Dr. Russell. She explained what had happened with you, so she took some of my blood and got the cure ready. But then there was the matter of finding you, and in the dark, with who knows how many other creatures out there, it took a lot to find you. So we fought our way to the control room, turned the power back on, and while we were at it, we disabled the frequency jammer on the radios for backup. And from there, it was only a matter of time before we found you." As circulation returned to my body, I made my way to my feet with the help of Starrlight. "All right, so what happened up there? Why were the creatures here, and how did they get in the vents?" "The virus is respiratory, something I tried to explain to Dr. Rawson, but he refused to acknowledge it." Dr. Russell stepped in. "As soon as the first ventilation cycle started, it made its way from down there to up here. Several of them began to transform. I barricaded myself in the inner office with doses of the cure ready. I mean, I really didn't have much else to do other than wait, and that's what I did." "So where's Rawson now?" Starrlight asked. "He's gonna have to answer for all this." "I don't know," Dr. Russell shrugged. "I haven't seen him since the outbreak up here began, so he most likely got infected and turned into one of those," she said. gesturing to the corpses either dead or cowering from the fluorescent lights. I suppose that's fitting, I said with a shrug. Destroyed by the very thing that you inadvertently created. Guess so, Scarlet nodded. So, how far out is backup? I asked. I can't be the only one getting sick of walking on carpeted floors. They should be getting here any minute. Advanced teams are getting flown in, and it sounds like Clay is with one of them. Clay? What does she want? I asked. Don't let her hear you talking like that. She's still our superior. But my guess would be that we're both in line for a promotion. The thought was comforting, a sensation that felt almost unfamiliar after the past day, and the minutes until they arrived flew by. The helicopters landed on the roof, and agents in hazmat suits entered through the rooftop entrance. Once we explained that we'd been cured, and that the airborne form of the virus would most likely remain dormant for several more hours until the creatures up there reached maturity, Scarlet helped me up the ladder and several medics attended to the bullet in my leg. It was such a flurry of activity, agents hurrying around and scientists yelling at them to be more careful, but I had been put on some minor painkillers as the medics fixed my leg, so I was oblivious to most of it. Once things started to settle down, Scarlet came over to sit by me. They're going to burn it to the ground, she said. They talked to Jace, since it seems like the company is going to him, and he thinks that it's the best thing to do. There's no board or anything. Rion owned the entirety of the company, so it's all up to him now. That's good, I replied. He deserves it. I'd only known him for that day, but if that was how he handled an outbreak of zombie virus, running a company should be light work for him. Well, that's mission number 1 in the books. I have to say that it's not my definition of routine. I might check out the benefits we got from that, she mused. Early retirement is a serious option for me. I laughed, but quickly regained my composure as a woman approached us. I recognized her immediately as Carmen Clay, and when I did my best attempt at snapping to attention, she held up a hand. At ease, Agent. You've done enough today. Thanks, ma'am, I replied. Well, if my ears are correct, I heard the words retirement getting tossed around here, she said, turning to Scarlet. I do hope a little mission like that won't be enough to scare off a fantastic pairing like you. I was just joking, ma'am, Scarlet replied. Although, I wouldn't say no to some time off. Of course, Clay nodded. In all seriousness, this was an incredibly strenuous, dangerous, and difficult mission. I could name a dozen veterans here who wouldn't be able to handle it, and I want you both to know how proud I am of your efforts. Thank you, Scarlet said. Also, I want to let you know what the scientists calculated. If you hadn't contacted us, there was an 87% chance that the virus would have made it out of the building, and from there, a 63% chance that it would have survived the first day. If it survived that first day, it would have become airborne, and in that scenario, there would be a 3% chance that we would be able to stop it. The world is in your debt, though they may never know it. My jaw dropped at the numbers. That's bad, ma'am. I'm glad we were able to do our job. So are we all. You two, you make an excellent team. You remind me a lot of myself and my former partner. I think you're going to have great careers with the Bureau. Thank you, said Scarlet. That means a lot, ma'am. Well, you'd best be leaving now, Clay told us. I'm giving both of you paid time off. Go somewhere nice. Enjoy yourselves. We assured her we would, and Scarlet helped me into the waiting helicopter. As we flew off towards the nearby base, the sun was just beginning to rise in the east. To those who have never experienced a sunrise from a helicopter, I must recommend it. It's beautiful. And with that, my first mission with the Supernatural Division of the FBI came to a close. It was my first, but it certainly would not be my last.
One more story for you, and I think I've picked a pretty good one to end off on. Brought to you by me, of course. It's a story about an email that's sent out by a strange organization. So, let's hear about the email from Mazer Inc.
The job was too good to be true. I understand that now. The message had popped up in my inbox like 1,000 before it. It sat nestled between a Buy Viagra Online and a Congratulations, you've just win a free iPad email. But as I hovered my mouse over it, I found myself intrigued by the tagline. I could usually spot spam messages, even the ones my inbox seems incapable of catching. This one, though, something about it caught my eye. The spelling and grammar were on point, and something about it just screamed attention. I moved my cursor over the box and hovered it over the email, preparing to break the cardinal rule,
I read the title one more time. Mazer Inc. seeking subjects for free at-home testing. I clicked it, and a very official-looking email informed me that I had been randomly selected to take part in a clinical trial. The email detailed the parameters for this test, the time frame for the test, and the payment method for completion of the test. The parameters were basically A. Take the required supplement they sent you with breakfast and dinner. B. Sign on and watch a series of videos every day for 2 hours. They would involve color patterns, pictographs, and several other standard mental tests. And C. You wear the required Mazer Inc. monitor device while I slept so they could monitor my brain activity and the effects of the supplement. For the price they were quoting, it sounded like a great job. I'd have been a fool not to look into it. I looked the company up online first. It's pretty easy to see which companies are scams these days and which are legit. Mazer Inc. was a publicly traded company, and they did a lot of business in pharmaceuticals and healthcare. They had a few squibs in the news about questionable business practices, but who didn't these days? At the end of the day, they looked on the level, so I applied to their email, thinking I'd never hear back from them again. The return email came a few hours later, thanking me for agreeing to the trial and saying they would ship out my initial package and my initial payment the same day. 3 days later, there was a brown cardboard box on my front doorstep from Mazer Inc., the logo stamped prominently across the side of the box. I hadn't expected it so soon, but the extra money was a nice bonus. Most of my work has been from home these days, and the little bit of it that I was getting was barely keeping the lights on and the rent paid. COVID was still making working in an office difficult, and in these troubled times, every little bit helped. I opened the box and found 8 bottles of something called NeuroBoost. They came in standard 120 capsule bottles and looked perfectly normal, just like something you'd buy at CVS. The monitor turned out to be something similar to an Apple Watch. It had a shiny black band and a smart little face that displayed heart rate, blood pressure, and other general health statistics. I slipped it on, but was confused when I didn't see anywhere to charge it. I shrugged, figuring maybe the internal batteries would last a while. There was also a check stapled to a set of instructions telling me how to get onto the Mazer Inc. website so that I could take my daily mandatory testing. For the amount they were paying, it seemed like a pretty sweet deal if all I had to do was watch a few videos and take some pills and watch the movies for 2 hours a day. When I got up the next morning, there was a bright display on the front of the watch reminding me to take my pills and do my training. So I got up and made some breakfast, took my pills, and got ready for my day. The pills were oily and gave me some fairly rancid burps, but they weren't too bad. When the watch reminded me at noon that I needed to take my training for the day, I sat down at my computer and got to it. The videos were mostly a series of color patterns, flashing in quick succession, as well as a series of brain games that had me doing math or solving puzzles. I guess the pills were supposed to boost my cognitive functions, and I wanted to see if it had affected my scores on the games as badly as the text did. If it did, I couldn't tell, and after my mandatory 2 hours, I closed it up and opened my work folder to see if there was anything new from the office. For the next couple of weeks, everything was fine. I took my pills twice a day, did my mandatory testing, and wore my armband religiously. I found that I liked having it on after a while. It was very comfortable, and being able to glance down and look at my vitals was kind of nice. I've never really had the money for fancy tech, so having something that sort of looked like fancy tech was nice. At the time, I would have told you everything was fine for about the first 2 weeks. But after a few days, I began to notice some strange things around my apartment. It was subtle stuff at first. Things moved, items missing that reappeared a few days later, but it was something more subtle than that as well. Sometimes it felt like someone else had been in my apartment. But that was crazy. The chain was always on, the door was always locked, and, at least to my knowledge, I was the only one that had been in my house since about a week before the quarantine. I thought at the time that I was just being neurotic. But now that I look back on it, I'm pretty sure there was more to it than I was picking up on. The first real sign came to me while I was watching the color patterns one day. I'd been taking the pills for about 2 weeks when one day I watched the colors go from quick flashes of green and blue and yellow and saw a picture. It was just for a second, nothing really substantial, but it looked like a street. It wasn't a street that I knew. and it looked as though it had been torn up by something. I didn't get a good look at it. It was only a flash for a second, but I had to double take to see if I had actually seen what I'd seen. I kept a closer eye on them from then on, but I didn't see anything else that day. The program moved on to math problems a few seconds later, but I never quite forgot about that picture for the rest of the day. That's probably why I remembered it later. I was scrolling through Facebook later, just getting ready to drop off, kind of checking it over without really reading anything, when a friend's post jumped out at me. He was ex-military, and he was talking about an attack in Kabul that day, talking about how the military needed to do more or something, when the same street appeared in his picture. It had been the site of a bombing, and the street was destroyed, just as I'd seen it earlier. I sat dry-mouthed for a minute, just mulling it over in my head. The longer I did, the more I kind of began to make excuses for it. It was very strange, but I eventually chalked it up to similarities. I hadn't actually seen that particular street. I was just seeing it now and associating it with what I'd seen earlier. There was no way I had seen the site of an attack before it had even happened. It just wasn't the sort of thing that normal people did. I turned my phone off and rolled over, going to sleep as I told myself it had never come up again. The next day, however, I woke up and found that my shoes were missing. It wasn't like they were expensive or anything, just a pair of Walmart New Balances, but it was the fact that they were missing that confused me. I'd set them beside the door 4 days ago when I'd last left the house. There was no reason in the world that they should be gone, but they were. I could still see the mud from the running track on the carpet by the door, the only proof that they'd been there at all. I searched the house, thinking maybe I'd just put them down somewhere and forgotten about it, but they were nowhere to be found. That made me worried, but again, I put it out of my mind. I was just going stir-crazy from the quarantine, that was all. I just needed to get out more. I'd been taking the pills for about a month when I started seeing more pictures. It happened suddenly. One minute I was seeing red and yellow and blue and purple go by, and the next second they were solidifying into pictures. A Walmart somewhere, a Jeep out in the desert, a shoe left on a beach, a bunch of sunflowers, on and on and on. The colors were gone. I never saw them again. From then on, it was just random pictures. I called the number on the back of the bottle after reading it over to see if there were any side effects. After finding the helpline, the one that says to call if you have any adverse reactions, I waited for the robot call to cease and for a person to pick up. To my surprise, someone picked up right away, and I was spared the indignity of wading through the muck. The lady in customer service listened to what I had to say, took down my employee ID, and told me that this was completely normal. She told me that lots of people reported the colors becoming pictures. It was actually very common to get these sort of calls. She said that if it became anything worrisome, to let them know, but seeing the pictures was completely natural. I hung up, feeling a lot better. I kept feeling better until that night. Until I woke up in the middle of my living room with no earthly idea how I'd gotten there. I had my hand wrapped around the doorknob, and I was fully dressed in jeans and a t-shirt. I was wearing a pair of black boots that I didn't recognize, and I had my car keys in my hand. I'd clearly been going somewhere, but I had no memory of deciding to leave. I'd been getting ready for bed the last I remembered, easing under the covers and just getting snug down for the evening. I remembered falling asleep, though I clearly didn't remember waking back up. I sat up for the rest of the night, a cup of coffee in hand to make sure that I didn't try to slip off and sleepwalk somewhere. I had never had a history of sleepwalking, but I'd heard that people could pick it up later in life. Sleep dressing yourself and sleep driving were something I'd never heard of, but I suppose anything was possible. That day I went out and bought a stopper to put under the door. I bought a flipper lock and installed it myself. I would have put a second deadbolt on as well if I hadn't rented the apartment. I thought if I made it more difficult for myself to leave, I might not sleepwalk outside. If I wanted to blunder around my apartment, that was one thing. Going out with no memory of the outside was another, especially if I'd been intending to drive. I had been taking the pills for about 2 months at this point, but I never equated them to what was going on. I think maybe I just didn't want to. I liked the way they made me feel, and I especially liked the extra money I was getting every month for taking them. Some of the pictures I'd been seeing had come up again. The shoe on the beach had turned out to be a little card from a plane crash over Spain.
The Walmart had been celebrating its 20-year anniversary when someone had driven a car through the festivities. I had stopped really looking for them anywhere. I didn't really want to know what they were. I had my own problems to worry about. I'd woken up several times since the first night, standing in different rooms and having no clue how I'd gotten there. I woke up in the kitchen, toast burning in the toaster. I shook awake in the shower, fully clothed as the water fell over me. I came to on the floor of my living room with my legs under the couch, and I awoke several times as I fumbled at the lock on my apartment. Whatever was happening to me, my body seemed to be trying to keep me from hurting myself, and for that I was pretty grateful. I think my body knew the pills were doing something strange to me, but my brain was trying its best to justify the actions. It seemed like my brain might be keeping secrets from the rest of us, secrets that I would find out pretty soon. Then one day, I woke up somewhere different. I woke up as I was standing in a factory, preparing to break a tank full of cloudy liquid with a fire axe. I dropped the axe that I'd been preparing to shatter the glass with and looked around in confusion. Where the hell was I? How had I gotten here? I looked around and could see other people causing general destruction as well, but they didn't seem to have come to like I had. They were destroying lab equipment, factory equipment, and anything else they could get their hands on. They were like a group of mindless ants, swarming over everything they couldn't destroy themselves and wrecking it with sheer numbers. I didn't understand what was going on, but I knew I had to get the hell out of there. No one came to stop me as I ran, so I took off and didn't stop running till I was outside. Turned out I was actually somewhere I knew. I'd been inside the Terminus Chemical Building. I'd seen the building many times from the freeway, but I'd never actually been inside it. I had a vague idea of what they did, medical research or chemical trials or something, but I couldn't have told you why I'd been there destroying things. I started moving, making my way for the freeway, and when I got there I managed to thumb a ride and get back to the general vicinity of my apartment. It was the middle of the night when I got out of the building, and the sun was just starting to get up when I got home. For the next 3 days I stayed inside and strapped myself into bed every night. I stopped taking the pills and stopped logging onto the website for my daily training. It appeared that I might have lost my monitor while I was busily destroying the factory, but I was honestly glad to have it off me. My phone rang a few times from unlisted phone numbers, but I never picked them up. I was done taking their drugs and being their guinea pig, if that's all I was. On the third day, someone knocked on the door. After a few minutes of peeking through the peephole, I opened it slowly and glanced mousily through the crack. The monitor was on the front mat, sitting like a bomb on the rough fibers. On top was a note, my name written on the back of a folded Polaroid. I reached for it, not wanting it, but needing to see it. The picture was no grainy Polaroid, but a highly detailed photo of me as I smashed a tank of cloudy liquid with the axe I'd swung that night. On the picture was a little caption that read, "Can you see any colors in this picture? Take your pills, do your training, put on your monitor, and get back to work, lest we send this picture to the police and let them know what you've been up to on your nightly excursions."
And just like that, our stories are at an end for another day. But don't worry, I'll be back again with more great stories and more great times here on Cozy Horror. Till then, this is Dr. Plague wishing you a wonderful day and a spooky evening.